Excellent. Thanks everybody for coming tonight and welcome everybody to our August 30th, 2023 regular City of Courtenay Council meeting. I'd like to start by respectfully acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the unceded territory, the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Today, we acknowledge the passing of Courtenay's former city engineer, Kevin Lagan. Kevin joined the city in 1993 and retired in 2013, having joined us from the Fraser Valley. He was the first professional engineer in the position of Director of Engineering and Public Works and Approving Officer. While in this role, Kevin was recognized as a local government leader and advocate for good engineering practice. He supported and mentored island approving officers with other senior leaders and helped to work with the founding partners who changed the approach to management of rainwater in the province through the organization called Convening for Action on Vancouver Island, also known as CAVI, now known as the Partnership for Water Sustainability. Many of the innovative environmental and engineering standards that we still have in place today were adopted under Kevin's leadership and coordination with other city departments. His loss is significant for our organization and the city as a whole. And I'd like to add that I had the pleasure of working with Kevin at the city for 4 years. And I also knew him and his wife, Margaret, through their long-term role as foster parents in our community. We were much the better for having Kevin, and our city is much the poorer for his loss. And on behalf of the city, we extend our condolences and support to Kevin's family and friends at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian. Appreciate that. Next, we have Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thank you, Mayor. Tomorrow, August 31st, is International Day of Awareness, previously known as International Overdose Awareness Day, which is an event in support for all those affected by the toxic drug crisis with the purpose of remembering loved ones lost to overdose and ending the stigma of drug-related deaths. 2021 and 2022 each recorded more deaths than ever since the public health emergency was declared in 2016. Our community in the Comox Valley often has higher rates of toxic drug deaths than the overall rate of the Island Health region, with 37 community members in 2022 losing their lives and countless friends and family and loved ones left to grieve. The City of Courtenay acknowledges the harm and the hardship caused by drug toxic overdoses and the toxic crisis more generally, and sends a strong message to those who use substances that they are valued and that the community is working diligently to mitigate harms and impacts of the toxic drug supply. I did want to just note for those of you who have tomorrow afternoon free or are able to attend, our local event is happening at Sims Park from 12 to 4 p.m. There'll be opportunities to learn, to listen to stories of family members and individuals who are impacted by substance use, and an opportunity to remember those who we have lost. There'll be lots of different community nonprofit groups in attendance, providing resources and supports. Naloxone, there's going to be some food as well. So please stop on by tomorrow. Again, Sims Park, 12 to 4 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jolicoeur and Councillor Hillian. I don't believe we have any late items, and we'll move on to the adoption of the minutes. All right, and we're going to adopt all of the minutes that are listed here, and there's no errors or omissions, and we will adopt that unanimously. Thanks. And next we have delegations, Lush Valley Food Action Society, and I see Marita there. And if you just push the little button on the microphone there, I'll get your microphone turned on. There you go.
Great. Thank you. So good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and thank you so much for having us. You can just go to the next slide there. We also acknowledge that the work that we do happens on the stolen lands of the Aïksin, Satlut, Tsatsitla, Pentlech, and Comox people, collectively known as the Comox First Nation. Next slide. Lush Valley, as many of you know, envisions a region where healthy local food is at the heart of community well-being. And we're really here today to say thank you for your general commitment to food security and your ongoing support and partnership around the Share the Harvest Garden program specifically. Next slide. It's hard to believe, but it's been almost 5 years since the partnership agreement was developed and then signed in January of 2019. After council members toured the garden in the growing season of 2018, most of you current councillors were on that tour. And we are currently in the process of renegotiating the partnership agreement with city staff. So we wanted to take an opportunity to reflect on the work of the past few years with you. And I also just wanted to note that staff wanted to make it clear that council doesn't need to provide any direction to staff at this time. However, at Lush, we wanted to be transparent that we're going to request a per year increase just to deal with rising costs of cleanup, programming, and maintenance. As you can imagine, the on-site costs have really increased over the last 5 years. So I'll now turn it over to Lush's Urban Agriculture Manager, Carly, to share some successes and how the program is meeting the city's goals. So next slide, please.
So the Share the Harvest Garden sits just next door to us at the corner of 6th and Harmston. It was established in 2000 and Lush has been the leaseholder since 2015. We currently have a 5-year lease agreement and $10,000 of in-kind funding annually. Our current lease expires in March of 2024. We deliver reports annually to Joy Chan, indicating how funds were spent, matching funds coming from Lush, and a detailed report on our activities. So our presentation will focus on the ways the Share the Harvest Garden fulfills the city OCP. These include objectives around the natural environment, parks and recreation, and food systems. We'll also be sharing testimonials from folks who are involved in the garden, some of them who are here today to show their support, and describing the benefits they receive from participating. Next slide, please. The Share the Harvest Garden provides a space for the community to engage in stewardship of the natural environment while contributing to cleaner air and soil. We use all organic gardening methods to increase soil fertility, reuse all garden waste in our compost bins, and contribute to carbon sequestration by planting perennial species. The garden contributes to tree canopy cover targets by cultivating diverse tree species, including red osier dogwood, cottonwood, cherries, figs, cascara, and multiple species of willow. Next slide, please. The Share the Harvest Garden provides habitat for diverse plant, animal, and insect species, which promote ecosystem health and resilience, and creates a green space in the urban core. The garden serves as an educational platform where people can learn about sustainable gardening practices, zero waste management, the use of local and climate adapted plant species, and the importance of conservation. Our primary user groups of the garden are seniors, Indigenous groups, people experiencing homelessness, and youth through partnerships with organizations like the Foundry and Vanier High School's Aspire to Action program. Next slide. Moving on to parks and recreation, the Share the Harvest Garden contributes to equitable access to natural areas and outdoor recreation by providing opportunities for residents of the urban core to engage in food production and exploration. We engage diverse populations that work together, such as seniors mentoring youth during garden work parties. We've also had success with our peer program, which offers people experiencing homelessness the opportunity to receive employment training, take home a share of the harvest, and be provided an honorarium for their time. Some of the partners Lush connects with through our network include the Foundry, Indigenous Women's Sharing Society, Coalition to End Homelessness, Immigrant Welcome Center, Head Injury Society, Vancouver Island Enterprises, and various farms and greenhouses. These collaborations allow for the expansion of programs and services related to the community garden. Some trainings that we have offered include regenerative agriculture and permaculture, beekeeping, herbalism and traditional Indigenous foodscapes, stigma reduction, and naloxone training. Next slide. The garden provides recreational, I think we are a few slides back there. Yes, there we go. The garden provides recreational opportunities that support health, wellness, and social connections. Participation promotes physical activity, healthy eating, and social interaction. The garden provides accessible, inclusive, and sustainable space for outdoor recreation, promoting health and well-being, enhancing connectivity, supporting climate action and reconciliation, and fostering community partnerships. Next slide. The city OCP explicitly mentions community gardens as a means to increase food growing opportunities for residents. The garden is located in an area of high residential density and is home to equity priority groups, including people experiencing homelessness. Food grown in the garden is accessible to all, and many growing spaces are designated communal. We are also able to bring excess food from other Lush programs to our weekly work party, distributing it freely to anybody in the community who stops by. Next slide. One mandate within the city OCP states lands supporting traditional foods are protected and traditional practices are celebrated. Within the Shell Harvest space is a Medicine Wheel Memorial Garden, which has existed since 2015 and provides space for Indigenous people to cultivate culturally important plant species. Decisions are made by and for Indigenous groups using the space, with support from Lush for resources needed to grow, harvest, and preserve traditional foods. We have used the Share the Harvest Garden to host gatherings with Indigenous groups, including the Mikisew Métis Association, Wache Friendship Center, and Indigenous Women's Sharing Society. There's a group that comes weekly to care for the Medicine Wheel Garden. They often bring drums and traditional song, especially on special occasions like the planting of the cedar trees. Next slide. Each year, Lush delivers over 50 hours of food skill education to participants. This includes weekly work parties where community members learn about sustainable food growing practices. We just completed a 9-week program partnering with the Foundry, providing paid job training to youth. Lush provides resources, including seeds, starts, and soil to any and all community members who wish to participate. Lush aims to increase food security in the community at large through our education and resource provision. We utilize the Share the Harvest Garden to access equity priority groups, including seniors and the unhoused. The Share the Harvest Garden is an excellent example of how diverse populations can work successfully together and provides an opportunity for land connection that all city residents can access. We'll now turn it over to videos of gardeners sharing their experiences.
Any questions?
Good timing. Fantastic. Thanks for that. I don't see any questions just yet. I think council's fairly, I think, familiar with a lot of the projects you guys do. Just want to take a moment to thank you for your presentation today and maybe ask one question. I know I was able to take a look at the location over in Tin Town prior to the renovations and maybe just give a bit of an update on those renovations. That's my softball question, and I got a harder one.
Okay.
coming up.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'd love to actually have you come down and see the progress in Tin Town. So we've just finished the kitchen. So we've actually just, as of last week, started a program with NIC that's a food prep and food truck programs. So big changes. We've got a walk-in cooler that's quite extensive, and now we've got our kitchen in place. So yeah, it's been we've been there not quite 2 years, so it's really transformed. And any of you are welcome to stop by and check it out.
Awesome. All right. And my slightly more pointed question, just you alluded to the fact that you're going to be asking for an increase from funding from the city, and I just maybe articulate a little bit about other funding that you get. Hopefully, I'd like to hear, Town of Comox, Cumberland, CBRD, et cetera, but I'm not sure where other funding comes from, but just wanted to see if it's coming from the other municipalities as well.
Well, I guess because we're serving primarily, like, this is City of Courtenay land and we're serving primarily City of Courtenay residents. We're not seeing money that's coming from other municipalities specifically for Share the Harvest Garden. The funding that we do get is usually through, like, we often will get matching funds through VIHA, for example, to run specific types of programs. We have had funding through a TD environment grant in the past. Sometimes we have some funding that comes through gaming as well to support coordination. But yeah, we're not receiving funding specifically for Share the Harvest, just because I think of its location and the community it serves from the other municipalities.
No, fair enough. I appreciate that. Well, in that amount of time, some other questions have come up. I'll pass it over to Councillor Morin.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And thanks for the presentation. It's always great to get an update. I know we do get those numbers and narratives in the reports, but just to maybe refresh a couple things, I was curious what the breakdown is between the communal beds and the ones that are I guess allotted specifically to individuals. That was one question. And then the other was around you talked about you're increasing kind of the social benefit piece around involving maybe youth programming and folks who are unhoused and equity seeking groups, that kind of thing. And I just wondered if, I know you said that the needs have become greater, but have you been finding that you need to also kind of have different skill sets for that type of work? Because probably many of your volunteers come in with gardening expertise, but maybe aren't social workers. So those were the two pieces I just wondered about. Where was the allocation of beds, and then the sort of this blend of social work and everything else. Thanks.
Yeah, so we have right now about 60% is allotment and 40% is communal. As far as your other question, that is a big issue that we're coming up against. We're really looking forward to PACT coming into place, because it's something that really speaks to how Lush wants to move forward, and we want to continue welcoming diverse groups. And we do have challenges making sure that everybody's needs are met, because there's a big diversity of needs, and we are a food organization. We are not social workers, so we definitely find challenges with that. And I think that's part of our ask for more support, is navigating those challenges.
Yeah, I just really want to give you accolades for being able to do as much as you do around the social benefit piece and sense of belonging and all those great things that can happen down at the community garden. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Morin and Councillor Joker.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you to you both for the presentation. Really nice to see it all laid out nicely with our OCP and all the work that you're doing to support the collective impact that our OCP has for the community. And really happy to see all the partnerships. I was actually not super aware of all the layers of partnership that you have, again, with a lot of our social-based organizations, and also really nice to hear from some of the volunteers and the people that are accessing the garden. I guess beyond our OCP, we also have our strategic priorities for the council for this term, and food security, and a lot of what you talked about is within that as well. And Carly, in your report, you spoke to Lush Valley's goal of increasing food security through education and resource provision. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that, and if there's any concrete metrics that you're using, whether it be the baseline of where we're at in the community for food security and where you're hoping to support moving the community towards.
Yeah, so we are really fortunate at Lush to be well known within the community. So we work with a lot of farms and organizations that will give us a ton of donations. So we get lots of seeds donated every year. Vancouver Island has donated us 20 yards of soil this year in the garden. Farms like Amara are constantly calling us when they have extra seedlings. And these are all things that we can funnel to people who are growing food in the garden and using the garden as a means to increase their food security. So having Lush as sort of the center point or contact point is really giving us the ability to make sure that people who need this access are getting it. As far as concrete numbers, a lot of the food that we're growing at Share the Harvest goes out the door. So we aren't necessarily putting it onto a scale first. It's okay, we have this bunch of carrots, who's taking it home? And pretty much without fail, there's nothing left on the table at the end of the day, which is great, which is always what we want to see. It means that people are meeting their food needs. So yeah, we don't have weights because it's all going into people's stomachs, which is okay with me.
And I'll just add, I think from an organizational perspective, we do obviously through our annual reports, we kind of do have some measures in place in terms of mostly it's how many people we're reaching in our community. And we're seeing that steadily increase, but also when you look at the amount of farms that we're partnering with, the actual, it's usually not weight of food, but value of food that we're either purchasing or gleaning continues to just increase. We are looking at using a new tool just to measure that impact a little bit better so that we can tell that story. But we are actually finding, like, for example, in the vital signs, there's a real gap in terms of food security metrics. So I know even in the OCP food chapter that was created, it's hard to create targets when we actually do not have proper data for baseline. So I know that's something that we've been talking about, sort of through vital signs and others, is how can we get a handle on that information. In 2019, we looked very specifically, we did a scan of the needs of people specifically that were in the not unhoused spectrum, but the social, supportive, and transitional housing. And we kind of have a snapshot from 2019 of what those needs are. But we're talking about, obviously that needs a refresh. So something, similar to point in time count for homelessness, but would actually be for food security, because we actually do have a gap in data. So unfortunately, that makes it difficult to pursue targets when the baseline's sort of not there yet. So it's a good point and needs some attention.
Thanks.
I will add one more thing. We do keep track of the number of people who are coming to work parties every week, and that's about 10 to 15 people. I would say 60 to 70% are seniors, 30 to 40% are youth. And well, my numbers aren't adding up here, but 10% peers and probably 10% Indigenous folks. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your presentation again, and sneaking in there at some point there'll be a a request for an increase, but really do appreciate on behalf of council here, all the work that you do in our community. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for the partnership.
All right, moving along, next thing we have is the quarterly RCMP statistics for April 1st. That's been moved and seconded, and I'll invite Mr. Garbutt to talk. How's that sound? RCA, city manager.
Thank you. Through Mayor and Council, we have our RCP representatives here today. On the agenda is the quarterly statistics. This has been a bit of an evolution, and I'm really appreciative of the work Inspector Curvers and the staff have done. We've received some feedback from council. We've made tweaks to this report over the last 2 years, and this is the latest iteration. It's somewhat similar to the example that we had from the Cowichan area. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that we've had some engagement on this, but that it is still very much a work in progress. So I just wanted to have that introduction, and following the presentation of this materials that are included on the agenda, I think RCP staff are available for questions. Thanks very much.
All right, Inspector Curvers, I'm not sure. Do I, Pat? Oh, you
Actually, Troy's gonna talk.
look at the finger pointing already.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I've got my turn at this.
All right, Sergeant Beauregard.
That's correct. So you would have all received the information on the PowerPoint there. Right, so we can just proceed with going through it and give some of the highlights, and then we can field your questions following that. I sent that a couple of days ago.
We don't have any slides,
It was the PDF I sent.
just the report.
Yeah.
We don't have any slides, I'm afraid.
Was it a
Okay.
report with like a PDF or?
Yes.
Okay, are you able to bring it up, or? Because I sent the report, it's not slides, it's just the report I sent. Okay, we'll go through.
It's on the agenda, so we.
It is on the agenda.
If Brianne jumps into the Zoom meeting, she can share her screen with it on. Does that work?
Perfect, thank you.
We need to share this through the Zooms.
I know the councils will have that in their report as well, so
Yeah.
you can follow along, or we can look. It's pretty tough to see on that screen, but I'll go through the sort of the highlights. So the first quarter encompasses, as you all are aware, we follow a fiscal year calendar on our reporting. So the first quarter is April 1st to June 30th. And during this first quarter, we have an increase of about 3.8% calls for service over the same period last year. So that's a total of 3,946 in those 3 months or 90 days. That's an increase from 3,800 in 2022, the same quarter. So relative to that first quarter as well, the most common types of calls for service, there was an increase varying in almost all of them, except for 2 categories. That those increases varied between 6 and 30%. I would say most of those sort of common call types are doesn't look good in that, because the said there was an increase in almost all those numbers, but a lot of them were in those sort of nuisance categories. Nothing of that sort of high risk or violent crime type of category. The one, like I said, the good one in there is that theft's down almost 25%. And you'll see the common call locations. This was an increase, of course, from 2022. You can see they're all listed there, the top 10 areas where we respond to calls for service. If you scroll down on the screen there. It's the number one point there is a huge increase, and that again is, of course, that location was closed during a part of that reporting period. So it's not really apples to apples. And then, of course, like I said, you have all the data in front of you where we're responding to most frequently in relation to calls for service from the public. So that's, of course, that excludes the RCP detachment and private residences or public places. And in the downtown area, the most common calls that we respond to, those being an unwanted person, increase of 73% from 2022. Check well-being, those are our policy requires a two-person response for that, so those can be that's actually has changed in recent years. So it does take a lot of time and person hours. And again, those numbers are on there. And we can discuss any of those after for questions. And violent crime increase. There were 260 violent crime files in the city of Courtenay during that first quarter 2023. And that's a 17% increase from the same quarter in 2022. And we've broken down the types of violent offenses during that same time frame. 24% increase in assaults, utter threats is down, harassment calls were up, and you'll note there that there was a large increase in extortion, and typically that through sort of the drilling down on that relates to internet scams typically, and we can delve into that a little more deeply if you wish to. And down into the map, sort of the heat map, as we call it, where calls for service are located in Courtenay. You can see that in relation to, that's all the sort of all the calls for service and property crime. There were 611 in that first quarter, which is a 9% decrease. So that's good news. And then moving down again, we'll have the property crimes broken down into their specific sort of calls, sub calls. And get some better news there. And then mischief is a bit of a concern. Some of the numbers are smaller once you get down into those lower categories. So 1 or 2 makes a big increase, but it's usually not alarming. Like I said, that 400% increase in mischief, again, could be a scoring matter how members are interpreting those calls or those mischief calls. Some people might ask, what's the difference between mischief to property and that mischief caused by act or omission? Mischief to property is like that graffiti, vandalism, that sort of thing, whereas mischief caused by act or omission is that's somebody doing something that interrupts or disrupts other people's enjoyment of property. So that's what the difference between those two are. Then you can see that map of property crime. You scroll down one more. So again, that heat map or that map that shows the areas broken down into zones where the majority, where those calls are stemming from. Moving down to the next header is Controlled Drugs and Substances Act offenses. There were 10 drug trafficking files in Courtenay, which is one more increase relative to quarter 2022, the first quarter. And then that decrease is likely towards that decriminalization. So we're not particularly prosecuting those or dealing with those types of offenses anymore. Traffic offenses, fairly steady at not much of a change, 7 less impaired operation motor vehicle files in that time frame. The other ones are fairly consistent there with 1 or 2 different changes. And yeah, fatal motor vehicle incidents were down as well. At the last meeting that I was at, there was a question fielded about drug and alcohol related offenses or calls for service, not just offenses. So we do have in our reporting, when any member goes out to a call, they're required to report a general occurrence or fill out a general occurrence form. And it's got a bunch of data that's collected on it. And one of those is there's a drug or alcohol involved in that file. So it doesn't differentiate between drug or alcohol. It's just either of the two. So, and again, this is one of those things where I guess the computer people in the room will term GIGO, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So depending on how accurate the scoring is, it is sort of tried, we try to capture best we can. And we have readers that review that, supervisors that go over the file. But it's up to the members' interpretation when they go to those calls to add that. So we did have a 23% of all files that we go to in Courtney have drug or alcohol related things going on there. And in 7% of all calls for service, there's a mental health component according to their members' interpretation. That's the data that we have for the last quarter. And of course, we'll field any questions you may have.
I just want to note that it'd be interesting to see how we can compare the stats to the next quarter, especially when we implemented the foot patrol system and see if the stats change at all and see if it actually made an impact.
Excellent. Yeah, because this is the last weekend, I think, for the pilot project.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Inspector Curves is talking about the pilot project having our RCP constables walking around Courtney, which the feedback that I've gotten from businesses has generally been pretty positive, and from residents as well. So yeah, but it'd be great to see how those numbers are affected for sure. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation and for the work that your members do every day to keep us safe as possible under the circumstances. I was a bit curious about the pilot project and wonder if you can just explain a bit more detail about that. How many members are on patrol? What sort of hours are they working? And assuming it's been well received, what are our options for that service continuing?
So that program started the May long weekend is going to run till next week. And typically it's a 2-man patrol, a foot patrol. So the old foot beat. They run random hours. A lot of it was based on business hours. So they'd be working until 9 or 10 at night. They started random hours during the day just to catch the public and the business owners so that we can have that conversation with business owners, go to their problem spots and kind of deal with those kind of scenarios. So baseline is random times running toward the summer program. And that's something we can explore with the city to see if you want to continue that, because that could be a every year project. It's quite successful. I know the guys, the team members really love going out there. They're doing a good job. We have some good stats on it. I don't have them in front of me, obviously, because we haven't completed the cycle yet. But it'd be good to kind of see the comparisons when we're not there and then we are on a continual basis.
And do we still have the bike patrols happening simultaneously, or is the one replaced the other?
Bike patrol is a separate entity. They still have their own schedule, so they're still functioning out there as well. Bear in mind, they are responsible for Hornby and Denman as well. So we have seasonal policing responsibilities during, say, May to September, where they have to be on the islands. But they are still out there doing their bike patrols, dealing with the downtown core and all the other communities.
Right.
I think it speaks volumes that our members are signing up for those shifts as well. And like I said, we like to talk about it as being an enhanced patrol shift. So they're out there in that core where we're seeing some issues. So
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a traditional form of policing, and as we have more concerns on the street, it makes sense that we would have officers there to respond more quickly, and also to build those relationships that make such a difference. I'm struck by in the report that among the most common calls for service are for unwanted persons, and I'm not really clear what that involves. I suppose we all have unwanted persons stray into our lives from time to time, but maybe you could speak in a little more detail about that, and to what extent that is people coming to businesses who maybe have mental health issues or whatever.
Yeah, it's a scoring category we have. It kind of encompasses a lot of different things. So typically it's when the shopkeeper comes to open the door and there's someone in the vestibule and they won't leave. So it's not a priority 4 call, but it gets our attention, and we'll try and get somebody there to kind of deal with that matter. So it's not, doesn't involve violence or any kind of safety issues. It's just somebody's there, they need to move along, and we kind of go there to help that process.
And what would be your estimate of how many of those people have mental health concerns that need some form of treatment or other response?
That's a tough question, because for those ones, we're not really scoring that.
Okay,
The overall statistic was 8% of calls, but that's where the member actually goes there and has some sort of interaction where they can make that determination, or they make that judgment call that there is some sort of mental health component in there.
I'll have a couple more questions, Mr. Mayor, but I'll turn it over for now.
Thanks, Councillor Helen. Appreciate it. Councillor Moran.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for the report and the added detail, which is helpful. I think I may have asked last time, I don't remember, around sort of the qualitative data that I think you were saying that you were going to try to capture some of that with the foot patrols.
Mhm.
I guess it would be really great to know whether you're getting feedback, whatever kind of feedback, positive or negative, and some direct testimonials around that would help with the numbers, I think, particularly in the downtown. Is that something that will be included in the report?
Yes, we have a tracking document, so every time the members do a patrol, they're required to fill this out, and all their contacts and the type of files they're involved with. So you're going to get all that information.
So there'll be a narrative as a bit of a narrative as well.
It should be.
Yeah,
Basically, we talked to the business owner, they're happy with the response and things like that. So we're going to get a lot of that kind of comments.
that would be really great. Thank you. And then just in terms of the most common call types, the check, I just sort of chose the 3: check well-being, unwanted person, and disturbance. And I think you already kind of answered this, that it's really hard to say for sure how many of those are mental health related. But I wondered if you have a sense of how many of those did end up being like a crime was being committed, or it was more around some intervention being needed to move someone along, or that kind of thing. 'Cause I guess what I'm getting at is whether the PAC teams that are coming will be able to absorb some of those calls so that you can focus on the more criminal matters.
Yeah, so these would not be criminal cases. It would be strictly where somebody is calling and let's say there's a person down, or they're concerned for somebody acting erratically, something of that nature. Strictly, so we went there and found out there was an offense that would be scored in a different category. So yeah, it would strictly be
Yeah, so
typically a non-criminal case. But yeah, I think I agree with you. That is the whole goal of having some of these PAC teams and ACT and community outreach and things like that, where they can hopefully take over that need for us to be there. But again, how do we, if they're not out and come across it, how does somebody get a hold of that team, right? If we're always in that boat, that if somebody doesn't know who to call or to deal with something, who do they call, right? They call the police.
Yeah,
That's
for
what
sure.
happens.
I think though it is helpful to know that reflected in those increases are quite a number of non-criminal calls, really. So I think that's important to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moran, and Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for being here, gentlemen, and for working on this report with us to highlight some of the additional data points that we're looking at. And I guess just to add to Councillor Moran's comments around the difference between calls for service and actual arrests or offenses, I'm wondering if that's something in here, because some of these numbers, as you shared and as we see in the report, have gone up, and so they're quite concerning. And I guess I am curious if it's possible for us to, whether it be at the next report or in the future, is that the data around arrests versus offenses versus calls for service? Is that a comparative that we're able to
We're
see?
happy to listen to suggestions. If you have ideas and things you want on the report, we're happy to look at that and include it.
Great, thanks. And I guess one of I really appreciate the location piece outside the detachment and private residences. I think that's really helpful for us as a community to understand what kind of community well-being, social support services can be utilized in different locations in the community. So that's actually really helpful. I guess one of the things around location that I am curious around is these are non-residential locations of service. And you have identified that it doesn't include the detachment and private residences, but I'm wondering also if it's possible for us to get a comparative for private residences as well, the amounts of calls for service for private residences.
Yep.
Okay.
Just if you have a list, you can prepare that for us and we can have a look at it.
Great.
Well, if you look at the map, you can sort of glean that information. Private residences would be everything else. You know what I mean? So most of those downtown core, it's all businesses, like there'll be the few exceptions on apartments and things like that. The residential areas are sort of laid out in that. But I don't know that.
I'm
Like, it
thinking
would
about this
almost be
Courtney
impossible.
East. Courtney East has, I think on here, like the superstore, right?
Yeah.
That's considered in the hospital.
Yeah.
So there are some locations that are in Courtney East is the one that I'm kind of curious around because there's also a large private residency component to Courtney East that would be curious to know. And West, yeah. And West Courtney.
Well, that's
But it sounds like it's possible.
yeah, it's possible. We
Great.
got to look at it. We'll talk to our analysts and see if that's doable.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur, and Councillor Hilling, round two.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just wondering if I'm assuming in these categories, for example, unwanted person, we're not necessarily talking about 402 separate individuals. You could be dealing with the same individuals over and over again,
That's correct.
right? Is there any way of tracking that? I'm not necessarily suggesting that you report that, but it occurs to me that if somebody shows up as an unwanted person more than several times, there's an issue there. And maybe there's some sort of other intervention that could take place to address that in terms of a referral to an agency, the PAC teams that we're looking forward to having, or some other response. What are the options for that?
So the thing we have is every call we have is one incident and one occurrence. So we score that individually and that person is attached to that file. So for us to do that, we'd have to drill down a couple layers and then do a browse and kind of see what the name pops up and then see if that pops up over and over and over again. But in generalities as well, we do sit on many various committees, situation tables, PAC teams. We have regular meetings with these, with groups. We have, the DBU unit meets them. So when we are dealing with one individual for one occurrence multiple times, or let's say mental health related over and over and over, we do have close relationships with, mental health and crisis team and these other groups like the ABI. And, like I said, we sit on a lot of committees and interagency partnerships, and we do discuss individuals and try to come up with, as our friends of VHAL would say, some sort of continuity of care or community care plan for individuals. So it's not just us working in silos, but we do meet routinely and try to come up with a strategy to deal with individuals, or if they don't need a policing component. We always do deal with discretion. First off, arresting, charging is sort of that last piece of the puzzle where we're out of options. This person now has to go before the courts or to have some sort of,
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm sure there's other members of council who, like myself, have run into the same people in different situations, have literally tripped over people. We know that there are some individuals who inhabit particular parts of the community and are there on an ongoing basis, and nearby residents regularly hear shouting and screaming when there's some sort of outburst. So I'm assuming that you're aware of those. Some of them are reported, some maybe not. There was a report in the Globe and Mail on the weekend, an editorial actually indicating that crime has gone up across the country in the last several years. We see it here as well. And we certainly see it in the number of inquiries and complaints we get from members of the public about concerns they have about safety in the community. And of course, we always encourage people to phone the police. I'm wondering though, to what extent your members see the perception out there in the community as influenced by seeing people on the street who look different, who act differently, and who are maybe a little bit uncomfortable with being around versus people actually being offended against in terms of assaults and other types of crimes. I realize that's a subjective judgment on your part, but your members are out there every day, and probably you hear from them perceptions about that.
That's a tough one.
Maybe for the next report.
Yeah, like I said, it's. The data is the data, but our members are at times frustrated with dealing with the same individuals over and over, and dealing with other issues that are beyond outside of our control. Right? We only have one small piece of the pie at times that we can act on, and like I said, I always like to say there's many spokes in the wheel that make it go around, and that's what we look for with community involvement, with the city folks and things like that to help us get a handle on some things. So I think we're doing a good job in trying to formulate those, those committees and those interagency meetings to deal with things that are outside of our sort of scope. Like I said, lots of issues we can't arrest our way out of. We have to involve other agencies, and we're working at one. It probably wasn't a very good answer, but
Yeah, and I think our members are very good at identifying individuals that are in crises, or if there's a need for intervention from our side. We're very good at that. Part of that is when we do have to have an intervention, we process, try and get them before the courts, and then it's out of our hands. And then that's a court process. So we have no control over that.
Okay, I appreciate that you work really closely with city bylaw staff and with city staff in general, and I know that the foot patrols, for example, is part of that engagement with the city around need for service. So I really do appreciate that. I'm going to totally switch tack, and this will be my last question, and ask you about traffic. Because by far the biggest concern we hear from the residents of the community is around traffic safety. And one of the recent issues that's come up is people running red lights up in the Lerwick Ryan Road area. We also hear about speeding, of course, and we've got initiatives underway to try and look at what we can do about that. One of the questions that came up is how effective the red light camera at the intersection of Cliff and 17th Street is. I wonder if you get data from that. Are people getting fined for running red lights? What's our ability to have a red light camera at some of the other major intersections around the community where people have concerns?
We do not get the data from that camera, so I can't comment on that. But I know our traffic unit is very robust. There's 3 individuals in there, and we do get TISMIT, which is basic traffic stats. And we're happy to share with those to show you what type of traffic offenses they're charging people with. And when there's a written warning provided, what we call a box 1 or a box 2, which means their car is getting towed because it's not safe for the road or instances like that. So we do track that, and that's through our provincial traffic services. And there's an actual, they have to download that data into that program for the traffic services, but we get that as well. So they are in the community. I don't know how effective the red camera is going to be, and what strategic locations we want to put that at. And it's I don't drive home down Cliff, and I'm not saying I'm going 50, but I'm not going too much faster than that, but a lot of people pass me. And that's a concern, and it's all posted. You go to the Walmart area, it's still 60 till you get past Fraser. And people are going way too quick down that road. So there's got to be some more enforcement. I know we have our local highway patrol, they're coming in here all the time doing the major roads, because that's their mandate as well. So it's not like we're not doing enforcement, it's just people just are not paying attention to the signs, and they're focusing on what their location is, right, where they got to get to.
So who would we need to talk to find out about those red light cameras?
Would it be MLTI owns that?
Well, especially on Ryan Road, because at Ryan Road, Lerwick and the old highway, those are those high accident zones, back road.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be a discussion between us and, the province over cameras and proper locations, high crash data. We'd have to look at the information to see where they'd be more useful.
Yeah, and I'll put it on record right now that I would like to see the reinstitution of photo radar as an enforcement tool to slow people down. As I said, it's the #1 concern that we hear from people about traffic safety both in their neighborhoods and on our major streets. And we're hearing a lot about Ryan Road, we're hearing a lot about Back Road. I know you guys make every effort to be out there when you hear that there's a problem area, but you can't be everywhere. And quite frankly, I think the impingement on people's civil liberties is worth it to keep the community safer. So I might be bringing a resolution forward in relation to that at some point in the future. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks so much. Well, it's good because I had that written down and now I don't have to speak to it. So I appreciate you bringing it up as articulately as you do. And maybe just as a reminder, Mr. Garbutt, did you want to?
Very quickly, through the mayor to Councillor Hillian. So Ms. Wade is actually meeting with the Ministry of Transportation tomorrow about traffic issues in the corridor related to development approvals. And so she's heard this. I'll ask her to raise that with, she's meeting with senior MOTI staff. So we'll get the ball rolling anyways in that regard. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for that. And I was just going to add that, this is especially when we talk about photo radar, which is highly political, especially with elections and all those kinds of things. But other avenues like UBCM and stuff are also fairly there may already be processes underway through those organizations. But locally here, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Citizens on Patrol, which anybody in our community can actually reach out to, and they'll go set up a speed reader. I don't know what you call it, but they set up and, they have the little gun and get people going. So apparently Cumberland, I was just talking with the mayor. They have some people who stand there with blow dryers. And that seems to have a positive effect on keeping people to go slower as well. But again, Citizens on Patrol, a great volunteer organization that I think works well with ICBC and with the RCMP. Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Mayor. When Councillor Hillian opened the door on the traffic, so I thought I would ask about distracted driving, and it's been on my mind this week because I had 3 incidents in one day where I was at I was coming up to a stop sign behind someone, and the person in front of me was stopped at the stop sign. And it sounds comical, it could become dangerous, but they were actually, on their phone at the stop sign. And, most people, if they're doing that, which they shouldn't be doing, when someone comes up behind them or something, then they're going to move along. I gave a little honk because this person wasn't moving. They waved me by as they're staying on the phone at the stop sign, like at a 3-way stop. So I just was curious whether you're seeing increase in those kind of, because it seems to be more prevalent from my experience driving around, and whether they're resulting in, dangerous incidents.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I don't have this year's stats, but previous years that had overtaken impaired driving as one of the leading causes of collisions.
Yeah.
And our members are certainly always on the lookout for it, especially the traffic unit. They will, of course, enforce that whenever we see it, but of course we are driving. So we build big billboards, so easy for somebody to hide the phone, but we do have some unmarked vehicles that are out there looking for that specifically.
Like, it's just so bizarre to me that someone would actually just stay on the phone and wave the person to, like, go ahead in the middle of an intersection. So anyway, I'm sure you've seen it all. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's a need for an education component again for individuals to just to kind of remind them that they're still an offense under a vehicle act to have your phone in your hand and be talking on it. There's exceptions to the rule, but that's just the way it's designed. But that education component really helps. And we always put out public service announcements through our media relations person on certain things like don't leave your computer in the car, lock your doors. And these are things we do repeatedly over the years. It could be 6 months, could be 8 months, but when we see a little bit of uptick in things, we will do that to make sure that happens. And it's the same with a lot of the traffic offenses. We send out numerous letters saying, we've spotted you. This is your car. Please, this is the infraction you did. This is what's going to cost you. Please be cautious. So it's basically a warning letter. So we send out numerous of those a week.
And we will be putting some more information out again through our media relations officer. Again, schools are be back in session here next week, so we need to be aware of those school zones and watch for kids out and about as well.
Yeah, and I did talk to our staff actually about the back to school, and so they've been sharing the information through ICBC, et cetera. Just a reminder every September to kind of reset and make sure you're obeying those rules. I think we had a pretty fulsome conversation on Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for your time, gentlemen. Sorry, I'll leave it to the cyclist. Ask the cycling question, but have you had to give any tickets for people parking in bike lanes yet? Or is that something you might look at doing?
I haven't heard of any. It'd be something we have to kind of.
Okay, well, it happens from time to time that people pull what I would say is too far into a bike lane to park their car, and it can be a little bit dangerous for people riding the bike lane. So heads up. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. Again, thanks for the modified report today as we iterate and make it better every time, hopefully. And
we look forward to the suggestions.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great night. All right. Next, we have we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, if that passes. Sorry for that. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, just moving on to the next item. Yeah, so I asked to have this put on the agenda tonight, and to be honest, I wasn't actually expecting to ask for a report, but what I was kind of looking for, I know this particular issue of culturally significant buildings, historical buildings I don't think it's really come up on our strategic planning, but I wondered, how important it was to the rest of council and what staff's thoughts were on the subject. And if it's not something that can be answered easily in today's agenda, then I'd happily pass this motion. How does staff feel about those two options?
And this is something that's come forward to the Heritage Committee as well, and staff are part of that process too. But I'll pass it over to Mr. Garvin.
If that's the case, that's good.
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Frisch. We've had a long history of sort of talking and describing historic buildings, but we haven't taken some of the steps that other communities have. Note that taking those as a registration form provincial process, there are costs and processes and staff related resources required. But I think it's important to come back with a staff report. That was the advice from our staff in that area. So we don't always ask for more work on the staff report side, but I think it's important. There are policies in the official community plan in this regard. And again, this is another matter that's really important that we're working through. So we as a staff are very fully prepared to come back with a staff report and solid discussion.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And that's what I was wondering. I wasn't instantly convinced that we had to do something, but would like to hear more. So I'll move that council direct staff to return with a report on Brendan Johnson's request to protect Sandwick Manor from demolition and the related issues with protecting such buildings.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Most people will be familiar with Sandwick Manor as the large Edwardian building behind the former Canadian Tire store. And I'd just like to commend Mr. Johnson for writing a letter to council noting the history, the significant history of that building and the people who lived there. I think it's well worth people having a look at that if they check out our council agenda. And I don't know what practically we can do under these circumstances, but I'd certainly look forward to a staff report in that regard. Thanks.
Thanks so much. And Councillor Chilukuri.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm in support of this motion. I guess a question for staff for clarification. Given that you're a representative on the Heritage Committee, is that I'm just curious if this is something that has already been explored and there's already been some staff time assigned to supporting the Heritage Committee's work in looking into this.
So what I can say from the Heritage Committee Advisory Committee, we actually met on site there and did a tour of it. And so we've had a few meetings where we've talked about the specific item. But again, I think the challenge that we run into is the Heritage Advisory is just that it's just an advisory, and we don't have the policies necessarily in place that would protect. But that being said, you know, it's one of those things of that protection may, you know, run into basically competition from the OCP in terms of densification and housing. So that's where having the staff to come back and say, okay, well, here are, you know, kind of tease out all those competing interests so that we can have a good discussion and kind of articulate what the outcome is that we want to have.
Yeah, I guess my second part to that is I just would want to also respect if there's been significant effort, time, energy put into this specific issue, the Sandwick Manor, by the Heritage Advisory Committee, that part of the staff's work would be to seek their advice on this, if that's kind of inherent in the development of a staff report, or if we need to have that specifically in the motion.
Okay. Marianne, Ms. Wade.
Thank you, Mayor Wells, through to Councillor Jolker. So there's a lot of history on this in regards to how it arrived at the Heritage Committee and what we have as regulations. So staff has spent some time in just answering the Heritage Committee's questions. But back to our city manager's comments, there is a legislative process under the Local Governments Act, which we do not have in play and process in regards to heritage inventory and buildings like these that have been on a list or been identified, because they haven't gone through the rigor of what is required in the Local Government Act to identify those, which is a very big piece of work. And as the city manager has alluded to, it's in the OCP policies as one of those tasks to implement with the OCP as we move forward. So it's definitely on our work plan moving forward, and we can come back with a staff report outlining the complex nature of what we have to do to move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and one of the other nuances here from the developer, there was a contemplation of potentially moving it as well, so it wouldn't necessarily be demolished. And some of our heritage buildings in the Comox Valley they don't sit in their original location. So, but I don't want to speak for the developer or this project where it is right now, because that conversation has been a long time, well, at least over a year, I would say, at least a couple of years happening. So we have a motion on the table. I think we've discussed it. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And next we have letter from the CBRD for the regional growth strategy. Right. And Mr. Garvey, did you want to speak to it or?
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, this is a piece of correspondence for information. It's not asking for any action. Ms. Wade and Ms. Goddard are our representatives that work with the regional district on the regional growth strategy conversations. And there has been information circulated at the regional district board about the initiation of the regional growth strategy. One item that we need to talk about is the revenue and the requirement for service agreements related to service extension. And that will be subject, the staff will be bringing back information as we participate in the regional growth strategy review. That's all I have.
Excellent. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That passed unanimously. And then we got a next we have the response from Minister responsible for housing. All right, and so that was just in regards to our request to meet at UBCM and or otherwise. And I would just take the time to say that we're actively, and when I say I use the Royal We staff, mainly really having great conversations, I would say, with BC Housing and stuff. So even though we're not having this meeting, there's lots of meetings happening with staff, and not just within BC Housing, but with Lisa Helps, the special advisor on housing as well. So there are lots of conversations continuing, and my recommendation and my commitment to staff is, for at an event like UBCM, I will be utilizing my abilities to possibly have some conversations that are unscheduled, I guess, for lack of a better term. So with that, any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes. Oh, sure. Thank you. All right. All right. Next, we have the bylaw compliance policy strategy project engagement and summary analysis. All right. It's been moved and seconded, and you'll have to push the little button on the microphone, and then I'll turn your microphone on there. Excellent.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Navi Sidhu, and with me is Meg Delalji. We're from Curiositas Consulting. We're here to provide you with a project update in regards to the bylaw compliance policy and strategy project. Next slide. First, we'd like to acknowledge and honor the traditional lands and the traditional keepers of the lands. We acknowledge and express our gratitude to the Comox First Nations, whose traditional territory this meeting is taking place. We're also grateful to the City of Courtenay for the opportunity to collaborate on this project. Next slide. So we've had the pleasure to work with the City of Courtenay on reviewing the bylaw compliance policy and service delivery model. The goal of this project is to provide a customer-centric strategy that'll reflect the uniqueness of Courtenay. It'll also have a strong focus on the importance of safety, livability, and quality of life for the residents for the City of Courtenay. Next slide. The project objective is to create a forward-thinking strategy. A key component is to develop a model that reflects the community's input with an aim to enhance public trust while providing outstanding customer service. The timeline is the timeline that shows our project timeline. We're currently at about the reporting stage. Next slide. So the project took a three-part approach. We did a current state analysis. Next, we had contributor interviews with external and internal stakeholders. We also had 3 community engagement sessions, including launching an online survey and the 3 in-person pop-ups. The current state analysis included a review of the current processes and systems in place. Our findings indicate that bylaw services is undergoing improvements to increase its efficiency, consistency, and fairness. Key developments have included strengthening performance metrics. Bylaw Services has implemented standard operating procedures to enhance staff safety and training. They've also implemented a shared electronic filing system for better file and data management. The current state analysis also determined that future technological advancements such as Tempest program, it'll help streamline processes and create investigative capabilities. Next slide, please. Thank you, Navi.
So as Navi stated, we engaged internal and external contributors to gain some valuable insights. One of the things from the current analysis that I will note for the city of Courtenay is that you are trending in the right direction. You are actually in better shape than you might have thought. But so we were really pleased to see that, which will make our work a little easier. But we were really excited to have to really speak to some key contributors. And we spoke to individuals from various city departments, including the bylaw team, and as well as key external partners such as the Island Health Rep. We spoke with the Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, the RCMP, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and others. These interviews were very instrumental in coming up with these 6 themes. So they identified 6 themes that will help guide our bylaw compliance strategy work. The themes will shape the strategic direction and in hopes of creating a more effective bylaw compliance framework. So the report that's before council has got the details on on all of the 6 themes. I will just point out and highlight some of the key things. For instance, one of the big ones, collaboration and partnerships. We are going to be creating a strategy that's going to encourage working proactively with community partners. There needs to be a collective effort needed to tackle these very complex, multifaceted and multi-jurisdictional issues that Courtenay is facing right now. And we're going to encourage collaboration with key contributors. Building trust while maintaining order through enforcement is going to be very important, and that will have to include an emphasis on a balanced approach with consistent policies and procedures, and it ought to include principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then from Island Health, some principles around some health principles. And then with the Coalition of Homelessness, some principles on understanding vulnerable persons and really getting our citizens to be part of that. So engaging our citizens, so there's better education around those experiencing homelessness and being part of the community. So that brings us to it was very loud and clear, homelessness and encampments. We are going to need to integrate a client-focused model. And what I mean by this is the client-focused model should be integrated into the resource allocation, which really ought to have an emphasis on collaborating with community partners in order to manage these very complex issues. We did find in our interviews that the departments, while they work fantastically on their own, there was very loud and clear siloed departments, and therefore it will be very critical to address communication and to ensure that there's coordination around these barriers and focus on an integrated problem solving and decision-making model. And then process streamlining, Navi spoke about, which we were really happy to see. The project team leads and the project team leads like Mrs. O'Connell have identified Tempest. And that's just one of the streamlined processes that will help Courtenay move forward with standardizing the processes for efficiency and leveraging the use of technology and digital solutions so that you can get some streamlined workflows. Leveraging existing resources is going to be very important. And this means optimizing the current processes and systems, as well as staffing and identifying strengths within the organization for effective outcomes. Next slide, please. So part of that community engagement, we did an online survey, and we, as Navi had stated, some pop-up community engagements. We went to 3 places. The Courtenay Riverway, Duncan Avenue and 4th, and Driftwood Mall. Now we saw some real good engagement. The online community survey attracted 451 community members, and the pop-up engagements was actually fabulous. We were at 2 of them, and we had valuable feedback from about, I would say, over 150 citizens. And so next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about the survey results. And the survey results, what we saw was they highlighted 75% support for bylaw enforcement, which is really, really important. When we look at survey results, anything over that 65% mark, when it's over that, we know that's where the community members want Courtenay to go. And so we're really excited to see a 75% support for bylaw enforcement, 65% wanting more transparency, which speaks to the case for what council is doing right now in supporting policies and processes. So transparency will be important. 70% would like to see faster responses, and that will come from streamlining your workflows and possibly doing some online engagement as well. So 85% favored education over, direct enforcement. So this is going to set the pathway for your Good Neighbor Guide, which we'll speak about shortly. And then there were various views on dispute resolution, which again speaks to the need for education. And then 80% prefer online service. This is really good. It's really good news. So it's excellent news for Courtenay, and we're really happy to see that. Next slide, please. So our next steps, and this is what our mandate is from the project lead is to create a Good Neighbor Guide. We want a guide that is tailored to specific user groups, empowering responsible behavior. But what I would like the City Council of Courtenay to know is that your project lead is very innovative, and what we are going to actually prepare for you is probably going to be the first of its kind. Other jurisdictions have focused on bylaws and creating a guide that starts with a bylaw, but Courtenay is going to go and create a guide that starts with the user. I am a resident of Courtenay. What do I need to know? I'm a business owner. What bylaws pertain to me? I'm a developer. What do I need to know? This is going to be very important. We're really excited to be able to create that with the project team. So I'm really looking forward to bringing that back to council. The next steps, of course, is going to be this policy. This is going to be very, very critical because it will provide almost a guideline for the citizens to understand where Courtenay is going. Whereas more people will delve on, hey, do we need more resources? Well, maybe not. Maybe we need a policy, and that's our policy. I always say there is no 911 in bylaws, right? Except for certain areas, and that's what the policy will speak to. So we're going to look forward to doing that, creating that. And then finally, the strategy really is going to speak to that policy and that Good Neighbor Guide, but the strategy is going to be based on those 6 themes. Next steps, please. Sorry, next slide. So the next slide is just our project outlook. We, as Navi has stated, we've completed stages 1 and 2. The current analysis is completed. There was an in-depth assessment of the existing framework. We now understand your strengths, limitations, and areas for improvement. We are at stages 3 and 4 right now, analyzing and reporting. We are looking at a deeper analysis of the collected data that we receive from the surveys, from the contributor interviews, and from the analysis of your current state. And we're in the midst of formulating some draft recommendations based on our findings. So upcoming milestones, we'll be looking at mid-September, bringing a draft recommendation to your senior leadership team. And then we are hoping to, in October, bring a final report to council, which will include bringing the Good Neighbor Guide, the strategy, and the policy. And then our final stage, which is an important part, and it's a part that sadly gets missed in many this is, we're biased, but we're going to say it anyways, is this idea of creating buy-in and understanding and being really mindful of the staff. when you bring changes, you have to be really mindful. So we're going to provide a workshop, a one-day workshop, which we do often for your staff, for the staff, the critical staff that are going to have to implement some of these key changes. And we're going to hope that that has some benefit to Courtney. And we are open to any questions. And we are also looking forward to hearing from you, Council, and hearing your perspectives on this.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the presentation today. And again, it's been really exciting for myself to see how our bylaw has evolved and modernized just over the last few years. And really, I think, a lot of that was pushed by a lot of pressure, but now to really be able to think about things and do it in a mindful way, I'm really excited about that. I don't see any questions I see one now. Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks so much for the presentation. It's really great to see where this is going. And anytime we've sat down and looked at where we need to go with bylaw over the last couple of years, I'm stunned at the progress that we've made in the 5 years that I've been sitting at this table. And this is also a further demonstration of that work. I had one question just around the theme that came up around transparency, because a lot of what is dealt with at the bylaw level often involves interpersonal conflict, and there is the issue of personal privacy and how we, as an organization, we're often in the middle of receiving a lot of personal information about what's happening at the neighborhood level, and then this expectation that is then going to be turned around and reported back to the complainant. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that, and maybe how that would be communicated in the guide in terms of education and what the public can expect when they have conflict with one of their neighbors.
Thank you. I might defer that to Kate Pond.
I'll make sure I get the right one on there. There we go.
Thank you, Councillor McCollum, for the great question. So transparency is not necessarily meant in regard to the providing of personal information. It's more along the lines of some of the reporting you've seen coming from bylaw services regarding our performance output. So the types of calls that we're getting, the response limitations we may be having, so those types of pieces. But it also leads into increasing or improving or dealing with customer service when it comes to if we can't get to your complaint, like investigate it, making sure we're having that conversation with them as to, when can we get to you, and then keeping in touch and making sure that folks know what bylaw is undertaking and what the process is and what they can expect. And then also wrapping it up at the end and kind of completing the process by letting them know that an issue had been resolved. So it's not the divulgence of the personal information, but more along the lines of raising that general awareness around what we do, what are the things that are impacting how we approach the work, to increase the level of understanding, not just of the bylaws themselves, but also of our processes. And how we're making decisions day to day from an enforcement or compliance perspective.
Yep. I got you right. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that kind of ties into like our corporate accountability as well. So maybe those two words in conjunction with each other, that the second piece to that, transparency, is accountability when we're dealing with this stuff. So yeah, thanks for that answer.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum, for questions and comments there. And Councillor Joker.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks for the report. Thanks for both being here today in person. It's helpful when we're deciding on the direction of the future of our community. I'm really happy to see that you're able to get out into the community and meet people where they're at. I think that's a big thing that I was hearing about in the most recent election, is people want to participate, but they're just really busy. So seeing that you went to 3 different locations, and the survey participation is really great. 451, I think, is a great number. I guess one of the things that I thought was interesting in the report around the survey results, which I guess is not surprising as someone who works in mental health and deals with conflict is a disagreement around the solution around how to move through conflict and the alternate dispute resolution. And I'm wondering, in the staff report, it speaks to some further work that's needed on that. We have an amazing organization here locally, the Comox Valley Community Justice Center, and they do a lot of work around mediation. And I know from the broader community, there's some awareness, but there's probably some work to do around raising their work up in the community and others who do this work. But I'm wondering if you can speak to what you've seen in other communities, and then what the plan is to further investigate ways in which we can understand the direction of the community for specifically how to move through conflict.
Thank you, Councillor Jolicoeur, for the wonderful question. This is actually a half me, half Magda and Navi with their experience. So in regard to the use of the I'm blanking on the name of community justice, we actually do refer neighbor disputes that are outside of the bylaw enforcement or bylaw infraction area. So some examples of the types of disputes we've referred through that process may include something like a neighbor is wanting to declare someone's heat pump a nuisance because of the sound it's making. It's not something that is covered under the nuisance bylaw. We are actively encouraging the use of heat pumps as an alternative to other sources of heating from an environmental perspective. Other ones have to do with fencing is a big one. You know, good fences make good neighbors. So it is really one of those things where often the first question we ask when someone calls bylaw is, have you talked to your neighbor? And typically, if it's not a bylaw related infraction, and if there's a barrier to them having those conflict-based or neighborly discussions, we do refer them. And actually, like, thanks to Councillor Hillian, when I started, it was one of the resources he raised or brought to my attention within my first few weeks here at the city. So we have been actively using that as a resource, but for non-bylaw related conflicts. And then we're very lucky, Magda and Navi have a lot of on-the-ground experience. And so I'll pass that mic over to them.
Thanks, Kate, through the mayor. To answer your question, it's actually two parts. It's exactly what Mrs. O'Connell stated, but it's also when we talk about dispute resolution, Courtney currently does not have the what we call the bylaw notice enforcement, which is the administrative tribunal dispute resolution. If somebody gets a ticket and they dispute, they have to go to court, which is a long term, but this is something that Courtney's working on. And again, with community partners, which is going to be very good for Courtney. So it will not cost you as much if you work with others. And I believe, Kate, you're working with this with, the bylaw adjudication in the regional district. That's going to be important, but people don't know about the alternative because they've been used to the MTI, which is the municipal ticketing information, where you have to go to court, and that costs money. It costs by a lot of time. The alternative dispute resolution, which is the bylaw notice adjudication program, you don't have to. You can actually come to this. You can actually dispute by phone, virtually. A bylaw officer doesn't have to be present. They just have to provide their report. So we will be working hand in hand with the project lead team to A, educate the community, and then B, bring us at some point to this form of alternate dispute resolution. The other portion is the idea of mediation, where the discretion comes into play. So it's not, your policy will hopefully guide that work. So the policy will say, you know, there might be priorities. This is where we'll act. You know, we have 4 offices and this is what's going to be where we'll act. However, we do hear you. And these are partners who are going to work with you. For instance, maybe restorative justice. We talk to them too. So there's going to be a lot of that type of dialogue, communication, and we're going to be exploring some of those alternative dispute resolution, which is mediation, and you know, creating less harm, maybe businesses
more peace.
More peace.
Which, if I can go, Mayor, for one more question, was I'm really happy to hear that, because I think it's one of the few times I've seen the word peace in a staff report and in conversation in municipal politics more broadly. I think the term that was used in the staff report was, and you spoke to being a first of its kind, where we're going to aim for peaceful coexistence in community. And I think given all the stresses that our residents and businesses are under right now, that's something that is ever elusive when we add a little stress in our lives from an individual or business that's challenging others in the community as a result of infringement on bylaws. So I'm really happy to see that that's the direction you're taking the Good Neighbor Guide, is to really harness and highlight the importance of coexistence in a peaceful manner. I guess my last question specifically is around the compliance component. So out of the 3 deliverables, the bylaw compliance strategy, I'm wondering, in your experience, have you seen different strategies related to compliance based, and the focus of this has been centered on the client? So whether you're a business or whether you're a resident or whether you're a user of a park, and I'm wondering if there are different in your work that you've seen, if there's different ways that we engage in compliance activities based on the client. So whether it's a business that's engaging in an infraction or an individual or in a specific location.
Thank you, through the mayor. How I can answer that question is what we have seen. We have seen different ways of different approaches. Let's put this way. But what we've seen to be the more successful, and I'll see if Navi wants to jump in on this, but the most successful is when you are mindful about being consistent. So regardless of whether you are the business owner or the resident or the developer, the bylaw has been written. There are regulations, and then there's policies around how we enforce. So the strategy is really going to be council saying, and depending on what council decides, of course, is going to be, maybe we start at the left of the continuum. Maybe we go to the right of the continuum, which means, education, a ticket, you're disputing it. Maybe we go back to the left again. Maybe we go back to the right because you're not hearing us. It's really the answer to that question is it's case by case. But the model that we've seen that works is education first. Like really trying to understanding where people are at, and then using discretion when discretion is available to you. And a very key one I could state with a lot of people, for instance, you go to a neighborhood, and the neighborhood might have, it's not unsightly. Somebody's grass might be a little higher than somebody wants a pristine lawn, right? It's like, I want this, but then there's people who don't have the finances or the health to actually have that pristine lawn, but what they have is not like terribly bad. That's where discretion comes into play. And so your policy will speak to some of those so that you can alleviate your resources as well, where resources are not spent on what one person wants, but what that neighborhood might really be, what the majority of the people that live in that neighborhood want to see, if that makes any sense. It's really going to be case by case, and how council wants to do within the policy. Did you want to add anything? No, I think you covered it.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for the great presentation. I think you've answered most of the questions now. And with that, I think we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? And yeah, that passes unanimously. Thanks again. I think council is very excited to see where this is going, and really appreciate the update.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, next we have the local government climate action plan update. All right, it's been moved and seconded. I just looked next to me and I was like, oh, people have left. And I will pass this to Janine.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. The local government action plan or Local Government Climate Action Program is a provincial program that provides local governments with predictable and stable funding to support climate action. The program was launched in 2022 and follows the former Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program, which may be known as the CARROT program, which operated from 2010 to 2020. So this is the second year of the LGCAP program. Funds have been committed by the province for the first 3 years of the program, and the province intends for this to be long-term funding for local governments and climate action. So climate action has been defined under this program as actions that align with either the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030 or the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy. So under the program, the City of Courtenay is eligible to receive $173,000 annually for 3 years from 2022 to 2024. So to receive the funding each year, we must meet the program requirements, which include being a signatory to the BC Climate Action Charter, measuring and reporting greenhouse gas emissions, completing an online survey to report the greenhouse gas emissions and our progress on climate action, and then having the Chief Financial Officer sign an attestation form to confirm that all funds were or will be used toward climate action. Once that's complete, we post a PDF version of this on our website as well, along with the attestation form. So we've fulfilled these requirements for both 2022 and 2023. And as part of the 2023 LGCAP reporting, the greenhouse gas inventory was completed. It estimates the emissions from City of Courtenay operations related to the delivery of traditional municipal services. So the inventory found that the total emissions were estimated to be 1,280 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. And the greatest source was from natural gas used in municipal buildings. Second highest contributor was fuel used in contracted waste collection, followed by diesel and gasoline in our fleet vehicles. So the inventory focused on city operations, and it didn't reflect greenhouse gas emissions in the broader community. However, the community-wide emissions are estimated by the Comox Valley Regional District as part of their community-wide greenhouse gas inventory. And that's prepared every 3 years. The most recent one finished in 2021. So the CVRD is working to complete a regional climate action strategy using data from the community-wide emissions estimate. And the city has been engaged in this process and will continue to support their efforts. So money received in 2022 from the LGCAP program has been placed in reserve. Staff are developing work plans to complete such climate priorities as updating the corporate climate action strategy, as well as upgrades to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our facilities and our fleet vehicles. So with that, I welcome any questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Appreciate the presentation, and I'll pass it over to Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report. This is a great update to receive. I've been wondering what this new program would look like, and it answers a lot of the questions that I've had. Just for reference, I don't remember exactly what the old funding was, but it was significantly less than what this is. So this is an improvement in terms of what the city is receiving for doing some reporting on our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, it is a significant improvement. I think previously we were receiving approximately 23,000 annually. And so the new formula for local government funding takes into account what municipalities were receiving previously, as well as their population. And so that's how they settled on that 173,000.
That's helpful. Yeah, I mean, 173,000 is actually a number that's enough to, I would think, initiate some actions that could generate some actual reductions, whereas 20,000 it's hard to envision a significant impact with a contribution that small. So I look forward to seeing what comes forward from this and how we can leverage this to improve our greenhouse gas emissions. Thanks.
Thanks, Councilor McCollum, and good comments about actually being effective and stuff for sure. Councilor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to staff for the work on this. I'm wondering if at any point council would see a list of projects that are generated in discussions with our various departments. And one of the things that occurs to me, I recall from the budget that we're replacing the roofs on 3 of our municipal buildings this year. And I wonder if any consideration has been given to a different type of construction, whether green roofs or solar panels or anything along those lines, and whether that would fit in with this initiative.
Mr. Garbett wanted to make a comment.
Thank you, through the mayor, to Councillor Hillian. Council may recall in our discussions about the use of the grant from the province, we had talked about resiliency and energy generation. So we'll be coming back to council in that regard. What you're describing is exactly what would happen through our corporate climate action planning program, and identify opportunities at our different facilities, both to retrofit but also to be incorporated in new construction. And many municipalities have utilized these funds to some have the difference between hybrid things. There's a famous story about buying the electric Zamboni, those to cover those differences from regular purchases. But these are some items, and we do have a corporate plan from 2009, I believe it's 2009. Thank you, Mr. Davidson's nodding, that we need to update. There's such a great opportunity now to align both our community plan priorities, moves that are happening amongst the BC Building Code, as well as our corporate priorities to really, I think, do a great job. And I think we have some excellent opportunities to be leaders, to be demonstration projects, to mirror some of the things that our own development committee has been doing for many years already, and just kind of come up to speed. I think it's a great opportunity.
That's great. Thanks.
And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Ms. Tazioli, for the report. And thanks for those comments, City Manager. I was thinking the same thing. It would really be nice to see an update down the road, and maybe you already plan to bring something back at a certain time where we can see what sort of decisions are being made, focusing on buildings, focusing on transportation. Obviously, a lot of these greenhouse gas emissions are coming from our fleet vehicles, and I know we're moving towards electrification. So really excited to see what sort of decisions staff are making and where they think it's money's best spent. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks again for the update. Really appreciate it. And sounds like there's some more info to come, and maybe some pictures or it might even be appropriate if there's something simple, just to give council a heads up, even a Friday correspondence email or something that just kind of gives us a little taste of things that are happening. As you can tell, there's a lot of excitement around stuff, especially as it sounds like there's a real investment. So with that, all those in favor? And that's unanimous. And we'll do the Courtenay Fire Department semi-annual activity reports. I was going to turn the podium mic on, but it's already on. So there you go.
Thank you. Through the CEO to Mayor and Council. What I'm presenting to you today is a quick activity report from the fire department that runs from January 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2023. Basically broke it down into 4 different categories: fire department responses, training, fire inspections and prevention, and then strategic priorities. Obviously, the biggest thing, or the area of most activity for us for the first half of this year, has been with fire department responses. We've responded to 696 incidents during this time period, which is 267 more than the same time period in 2022. As you can see in the report, our top 4 calls, or top 4 responses, are to alarms activated incidents, open burning, motor vehicle incidents, and ambulance assists. From a training standpoint, our members have put in 838 hours of training so far in the first half of the year. Topics, one of the bigger things that we focused on, as you know, was the orientation and getting Tower 12, our new ladder truck, into service and getting our crews familiarized with how to operate it, as well as also doing our standard stuff, live fire drills, auto extrication, search and rescue, things like that. We also were able to do quite a bit of training with our mutual aid partners, so Merville Fire Rescue, Cumberland Fire Rescue, Comox Fire Rescue, Oyster River Fire Department. There has been a lot of joint training, excuse me, that has taken place during this time period. So it's been a very productive first 6 months. Fire inspections and prevention humming along, 898 fire inspections of commercial properties in both the city and the fire protection district, which is pretty much on pace as in years past. There hasn't been too much of a change in the inventory of businesses for us. We also did 7 fire investigations, which are a requirement of the province of BC. 6 of these were related to structure fires that we attended in the first half of the year. Again, our crews are very excited with the COVID restrictions being lifted, that we've been able to get back into doing the fire prevention, public education events. So far, we had done 40, which is actually, up a little bit in, comparison to years past. But again, things, fire smart education, fire hall tours, fire safety house, things like that have really been positively received by the community, and also have been great for the morale of the department. And in strategic priorities, as you can see, we've got pretty much all of them either completed or well on their way to completion. Important, or the one that I'm the happiest about, is the mental health and resiliency program. We've got 4 out of 6 sessions done. Feedback from the crews has been outstanding. The next one, actually, we're pretty excited about. We're going to be bringing in our spouses that wish to come in and participate, or partners that wish to come in and participate, and just talk to them about what it looks like, what their partners might be experiencing, but also to provide them with some tools and some resources to help them go through the process if somebody is a little banged up mentally from a call or whatnot, because they're often the ones that do get forgotten about or fall through the cracks. Everybody tends to focus on the individual that's going through the trauma, but we tend to forget about the things that are happening at home. So that's on, I believe that's going to be the November session. So I'm personally really looking forward to that one there. And the other good news of that too is our recruit training program. We finished that up 2 weeks ahead of time. So we've got 9 people that are truck ready, which means that they can respond to just about any calls that are thrown our way. And we're going to be starting our new recruits, so our 2023 recruit program that'll be starting up here in September. So that's been really positive as well. And with that, I'll open up the floor to any questions that council might have.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your presentation. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Chief McDonald. It's been a tough summer for firefighters all over, and as you all know, and we've actually lost some firefighters both in BC and in other parts of the country, and I'm sure your members have felt the impact of that. I'm just wondering if you could share what engagement members of the Courtenay Fire Department have had in helping out with other parts of the province.
Thank you for the question. So we were on our 2nd deployment to the Shuswap area. We sent a crew of 3 people that was just changed out. And again, forgive me on the dates here. We changed them out this past Friday. So the first team did 10 days. The second team is currently working through their 10-day deployment. And we are in the process of finding 3 more people to see if they're interested in relieving the second crew. That email just went out today. So we've been basically on this round, we've been probably, I'm thinking 17 days that our crews have been up there. Deputy Chief Siegler was also requested or asked if he was available, which he was, to be a task force leader. And he was working down in the West Kelowna area. Basically, a task force leader provides leadership to a collection of resources, and they would be going through various communities, providing fire smarting, putting out spot fires, things like that. So in total, we had a deputy chief, 3 firefighters, and our pickup truck or bush truck, if you will. Those were the resources that we deployed. We did receive a request for additional apparatus, but it wasn't to be responsible for us to send more out of town, because obviously our priority is to look after the people in our community first. So pretty much we've provided the province with everything that we had that was available and responsible to send.
Thanks. And I know you'll convey our appreciation to those members for that additional service, putting themselves in harm's way. Second question, you'll understand that many local residents are worried about what happens if we experience fire. We've been incredibly fortunate here in this part of the island. But 2 of the questions that I've had from people in the community have been around if we had a wildfire emergency here. First of all, what's the impact of the building materials that most homes are made of these days in terms of fire prevention or otherwise? And secondly, what sort of exit plans would we have in place if areas of Courtenay were threatened by wildfire?
In terms of building construction materials, obviously, if you're using non-combustibles like metal roof versus cedar shake, if you're using hardy plank versus vinyl siding, you are improving the fire resistance rating of your home or your building. That said, it's what else you have around it. So you can have, that particular type of construction, but if you've got trees overhanging, if you've got your wood pile close to the home, you are reducing the resiliency of the building based on those types of things. So while construction does play a part, there's a whole program called Fire Smart. We've all heard about it. It does provide some pretty good detail on what you can do to put your property in the best chance of surviving a wildfire type of event. Generally, where things kind of fall apart, it's the flying brands that get carried with the wind. They end up underneath wood decks. They end up against the base of the house, and that's where they start getting into wood or combustible materials, and that's how the fires get going. And often how you'll have 3 homes in a row that are fine, and then the 4th one's burned, and then the next 3 are fine. It's just that type of what type of maintenance is also being undertaken at the home. In terms of the evacuation routes, City of Courtenay itself, there are some dead end streets in the city, and there are some, like, for example, Glen Urquhart Drive up in East Courtenay. There you've got some pretty heavy timber in there. It's one way in, one way out. That said, you can cut through people's yards and do whatever in the event of an emergency. So the city itself, really, there are multiple options to get people moved, if you've got enough time and warning and whatever to do it. When you're looking at it from a valley perspective, that's one of the reasons why the Comox Valley Emergency Program, collectively, we put that grant request in for the evacuation route. So funding from that will be used to do an assessment and come up with some suggestions for areas, say like Macaulay Road out in the Black Creek area, which is 9 kilometers long one way in, maybe a goat trail out. We can identify those and then come up with some strategies to deal with that stuff. So again, it's kind of hard to say definitively what in the city would be an evacuation route, because I don't know what the size of the fire is. I don't know the wind conditions are, and so on and so forth. But we are in good shape overall in the city. The rural areas would need some work.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks for the question and in particular the comments about the firefighters that are doing amazing work throughout the province right now, and also thanks to the firefighters that are being sent really from around the world right now and providing us that extra support. Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thanks for answering the question about the evacuation. That was one of the ones I had as well. A couple things. Well, it almost seems like the next, if there's any indication with the last few days, your next quarter is going to be have higher calls, because it seems like you've been hopping over the last few days. And I know you may not be able to say too much about details, but it is sort of public knowledge that there were several fires set over the weekend. So I guess I was curious about, I'm not saying that those were arson or anything, but do you report arson in a separate category. And I guess my other question was around whether the fire department even handles, like, does that get sent over to the RCMP or another task force or something when something like that happens? And I don't know if there's anything you can speak to about what's been happening over the last few days, or if that's settled down or anything like that. But that was my first question.
So great question. Many layers to it. First and foremost, if a fire is deemed suspicious, we involve the RCMP. I can say that with the activity that took place this past weekend, the RCMP were very, very helpful. They came in and started walking different trailheads looking for people of interest. They actually even had the helicopter up that was helping us locate the fires. The area that the fires were taking place, as many of you know, was in between the Veterans Memorial Parkway and Muir Road. I mean, I would say it's dense forest, but it's, it's heavily treed. The trails, some of them are good, some of them not so much. So they were actually very, very helpful with the amount of support they provided us. Now, unfortunately, we didn't find any people of interest. What I will say is that while some of those fires were suspicious, some of them also had been burning for a few days undetected. And you can tell that by how deep they get into the soil and also how much undermining of the root systems of the trees that were in place. So I do know that social media did make it sound like we had somebody running around doing a bunch of damage. And that's not to say that that might have been some of them. However, it wasn't all of them for the weekend. And again, if it's deemed suspicious, we do work with the RCMP. And yeah, so basically from a fire code from a fire investigation standpoint, if a fire is not deemed suspicious, the fire department's responsible for doing the investigation. As soon as the fire is deemed suspicious, the RCMP become the authority have a jurisdiction, because then it becomes a criminal type of activity.
Right. I would assume that your expertise in exactly what you just talked about, determining cause and all that, would be part of that investigation. But it does kind of speak to how resources can be really stressed when these kind of things happen. So just appreciate all the work there. I was really happy to hear what you said about the resilience, mental health resilience, and involving partners, et cetera. I'm not sure, this is kind of a funny thing, but I'm not sure if you were contacted by the VIU University student about the she's doing her thesis on resilience in romantic relationships of first responders, and it doesn't sound like you were contacted. Anyway, she's actually a daughter of a friend of mine, and it sounds like a really interesting project around and really speaking to how spouses and partners are often kind of left out of the equation, and the resiliency. So anyway, you might get a call. You might be part of a research project, if you consent, of course. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Councillor Morin. Sorry. One last thing. I think most of the questions and comments have been made, but I do, you talked about the social engagement and getting the firefighters back out there, and I just want to give a big kudos for the firefighters that stepped up and made sure that Lawrence Burns was able to make it to an event last week. And as a former fire chief, but really great community member, who has having some challenges, and just time after time the firefighters stepping up to make sure that he's able to make events. I just really want to say on behalf of the city, we're really appreciative. So
thank you.
Yeah. With that, we got a motion on the floor, I believe. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. And we'll move on to the next. We have a Courtney branding and templates refresh. Oh, how about I turn your microphone on? There we go.
Hi, I'm Ann Gu. I'm the manager of communications here at the City of Courtney, and I'm very happy through the city manager and council to introduce updated core brand standards for council's consideration. This project was identified as one of council's strategic priorities in 2022. As outlined in the staff report, The city's current brand standards were developed in 2014. These were the first formal brand guidelines ever developed for the city of Courtenay, and they were fairly limited in scope. And over time, we've identified various areas where updated branding would be beneficial for the city. One example is the complexity of our city crest. The crest was originally designed decades ago, and its high level of detail can result in printing challenges, especially at small sizes or printing on materials other than paper. In the past, we've worked with vendors on various projects who've developed individual printing solutions for our crest, but these outcomes can be inconsistent. Through this branding project, we have been working towards a more cohesive and unified brand across all of the city's many communication tools and platforms with a look and feel that's uniquely Courtenay's. We're heavily focused on improving accessibility, efficiency, and functionality for staff preparing city branded materials so they can more easily produce these items on their own. We are also prioritizing accessibility for everyone who receives these materials. All of our residents, we want to make sure that information shared by the city is meeting current accessibility requirements. City staff have been working with Trapeze Communications toward this goal. I'm very pleased to introduce Richard Fisher and Martin Abiyard from Trapeze to walk you through updated brand concepts.
Thank you, Anne. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I mean, Anne, I think set up the challenge that we faced on this assignment with regards to the current city identity. And I think to kind of summarize it best, I mean, we were brought in to kind of fix what is a somewhat broken system. I want to stress this is not a rebrand, but really an evolution and a modernization that will serve the city well in the short term, and certainly in light of the potential of a new website that may be in the offing in the months ahead or whatever. So yeah, we just want to walk you through the work that we've done with Anne and her team, and look forward to getting your comments and response. I'll turn it over to my colleague Martin, who has led the design process.
Good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, I think I'll jump right in where Richard said, you know, we weren't looking at this as a rebrand. It was really just trying to fix some things with the crest and the identity that were causing some issues in reproduction and in legibility. So first of all, it was just basically taking the overall shape of the crest and just kind of redrawing all of those kind of key elements. We've kind of kept everything in there, except for some of the sun and water around the salmon. We redrew the salmon, moved the water below that to kind of clarify that. We simplified the glacier and the mountains and the trees and the river into much more simpler shapes and a simpler representation of that. And then we saw some issues around the skier. There was some overlaps of the hand on the body and things that when you went down to one color made it hard to decipher what was going on. So we've changed the position of the skier, arms open, so we can kind of see that body shape a little clearer. We've kept the maple leaf at the bottom and then just revised our banner at the bottom with the City of Courtenay type in it just to clean that up and make it feel a little bit more modern, but the overall shape is still the same as the existing crest itself. We did a full reversed version, and this required a little bit of work just to make sure that our skier was still dark and not light, and that the positive and negative of the glacier still worked. So we had to keep, you know, we want our snow to be white and the river to be light and the trees to be dark. So we did a full inverted version where we added that sort of white border around the outside of the crest. Next one is our type treatment and keeping City of Courtenay with the crest. But bringing up City of to the same level as Courtenay, just to make this a little cleaner, particularly when we're using this in small uses on, you know, notification advertisements in the newspaper. And here on the bottom below the crest, we switched to Courtenay, BC, as we already are saying City of Courtenay in the text next to it. So you'll see that alternate as we go through, depending on whether the crest is living on its own, City of Courtenay, or whether it's locked up with this City of Courtenay text. We'll keep that together. Same treatment, just in the reverse color version. And then we've done, this is just, I mean, for functionality and usability, you know, there's always, sometimes there's space for horizontal logos, sometimes we need vertical. So we've done a vertical centered lockup. And then color, I mean, this is keeping in, again, not making too big of a change. We're trying to keep the colors that we have in our current identity system and adapting them over to the new identity. And just showing that colorway in positive and reverse. And then this is where we're at with our color palette. So primary colors along the top are kind of key 3 leading colors, and then our secondary palette below that we're introducing into some of the advertising elements that you'll see in a moment. One thing we have recommended is, as it was the old brand, there was some, I would say, typographic difficulty with City of at a different size, Courtney at a different size, and then a divisional title at a different size, sometimes all caps, sometimes upper lower. What we want to do here is to have City of Courtney be the primary brand for everything, but acknowledging that Courtney Recreation has its own unique target and unique purpose. We've set Courtney Recreation as its own type style next to the crest. So again, keeping the type the same size, keeping it at the same prominence, and just making it a little more legible, and just fewer kind of alternating type sizes. It just cleans the whole visual identity up. As we get into some of the other elements of the identity, typography, Open Sans is the current font. We are just verifying this, kind of going through its paces. We're looking at making sure that all of our First Nations language characters are available through this font, which we believe they are so far. So we're just making sure that we're keeping up with that. It is open source, so we can have this installed basically on any system that we need to in the city. And here we've started to lay out just some recommendations around the typography and design styles. And most of this is, you know, some good design practices, but also best practices when it comes to accessibility. And that's, you know, when we're talking about design, that's things like not using all uppercase type treatments to highlight things, trying to keep everything in upper lower because that makes it easier to read. Adequate spacing between text, spacing between sections of text. So when people are scanning a document or an ad, they can easily jump to the information they're looking for. And just overall trying to simplify the typographic approach to advertising and communications, just so we've got some ground rules that make it easy for people to access the information. And when we get into here, a sample poster layout. Sorry, if we can jump to the next slide. Just got some notes here. So again, in dealing with some of the challenges we've been having, you know, that we've seen around the existing templates, and one of those does come back to accessibility as well, and that is the use of reversed headings over top of photos. Just the contrast level between, you know, reverse text and photos can, you know, varies obviously depending on what the photo is. Sometimes drop shadows are added to try and highlight the, you know, to make the contrast better, but really to guarantee that contrast value. And that is one of the kind of hallmarks of accessibility and design, is making sure that we've got you know, the significant contrast between our headline and our background color, which is why we've chosen that box to kind of run our headlines in. And then all black text on the bottom over the color still meets that contrast level, and you know, makes it just easier to see and find the information you're looking for. I mean, we've applied accessibility as far as design goes to these. Accessibility when it comes to the website is a much bigger conversation around not just design, but also the programming and coding of that as well, in terms of navigation and also visual elements. So these were some sample posters that we put together to represent Courtney Recreation. Again, using our, you know, using the primary palette for City of Courtney, and then we can bring that secondary color palette in when we're talking about Courtney Recreation elements, you know, events and posters and things like that. And we've laid out some sample, you know, black and white newspaper ads. And again, not wanting to overcomplicate these and just keep them very simple and very clean, easy to format, easy to design, but then also easy to get the information out of for the viewers. So, and again, here you can see down at the bottom, the City of Courtney logo, you know, again, keeping that City of at the same size, it just makes a nice kind of clear, bold sign off to the ads and posters. And here's some more sample, just, you know, trying to put it through its paces, make sure that it works in vertical, horizontal, small space where we have no room for a visual and it is text only. This is a sample PowerPoint template, again, where we're bringing some of those elements that we have in the poster, our colors, our new identity, again, those high contrast text over dark boxes. And then I think we have a zoom window in the top right that we needed to account for there. And then as we've been working through, this was just an alternate poster layout that we had presented. Finding it's slightly more graphically complicated than the other one, but it might appeal to Courtenay Recreation to have something that is slightly more different from the city. So that's why we presented this option. And then same with this was an example of the city of Courtenay style poster in that same style. That's it.
So would it be at all helpful for us to go back and take you through some of the key slides, or we can open it up for comments and questions? We'll leave it up to you folks, obviously.
I think if council has questions, they're happy to ask. I mean, we had this material ahead of time, so we've all been able to see the graphics. I did bring up mine just to do that comparative of what it looks like today versus what these are. I mean, I could definitely say, like, yeah, I mean, everything that's been done makes perfect sense, like just making it simpler and easier. As somebody who's done web development for a long time, Open Sans is a great font. So, but those are fairly technical, geeky things that I don't think, generally speaking, you guys have articulated well in your presentation. So with that being said, I don't see any questions or comments. So I think that means you did a great job. I'm getting thumbs up here in case you can't see, even a clap. So I'll say for myself, as somebody who was eager to see this happen about, 9 years ago, maybe. I'm very excited to see how we're moving, and again, that simplification and just making sure that we're moving forward. Really appreciate it. With that being said, there is a motion that has not been moved or seconded, I believe. All right, it's been moved and seconded, and that's the motion to approve. And I don't see any questions or comments. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thanks so much for your presentation tonight. Sorry you didn't get inundated with a zillion questions, but like I said, I think that just points to the great work you guys have done. And again, thanks to staff as well for moving this through the sausage maker. With that being said, I'm going to make a recommendation that we vary our agenda a little bit to 7.2.1 and 7.2.2, which are just two motions or development service things. We have people in the gallery right now. And once we get those dispensed with, then we can maybe take a break for dinner. I think I can do it by consensus. Yeah, if nobody objects, I think I'm good. So. All right, Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that council approve development variance permit number 2303 to reduce the minimum lot size from 850 square meters to 453.6 square meters, the minimum lot frontage from 20 meters to 14.88, and the side and yard setbacks from 4.5 to 1.72 on each side, and issue development permit number 2316 for the form and character of the duplex dwelling unit, and that council approved development permit number 2316.
Second.
All right. Does staff want to speak to it at all, or are there any questions? Oh, I turned on the wrong microphone. There we go.
Thank you, Mayor Wells. I just wanted to highlight that this is a really good example of some of the issues that we're facing in development services. And as we move forward in our work plan, this is an example where we have an historic subdivision and we got zoning over top of it. And this is the ability the variances are allowing the duplex use, which is permitted, to go ahead and provide us with more housing. And so this is a good news story. And I just wanted to highlight that. And the applicant is here if you have any questions.
All right, thanks so much for that. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if we're able to massage things and get some variances through to make them happen, that's great. Councillor Jolker, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Definitely in support of this. Really happy to see this coming forward for our community. I guess a question for staff. More broadly, even just for my learning, primarily my question is around the side setbacks. And so going from 4.5 to 1.72 meters, is there like a minimum that is required for anything like fire safety or any regulations that you can speak to?
Oh, sorry.
Through the mayor to Councillor Joker. Yes, there is some separation regarding to fire and going through the BC building code where openings are, materials, etc. The normal practice in a lot of these zones is 1.5 minimum setback. Our setbacks are very large, and this is something we'll be addressing as we move forward.
All right. That being said, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and we'll go to 7.2.2. Somebody like to make the motion? Councillor McCollum.
I'll move that council approve development variance permit number 2303 to reduce, I'm on the wrong one. I'll move that council not hold a public hearing as per section 464B 2B of the Local Government Act zoning amendment bylaw number 3101 for 1410 Glen Urquhart is consistent with the city's official community plan, and that council directs staff to issue public notice as per section 467 of the Local Government Amendment Act that a public hearing will not be held for zoning amendment bylaw number 3101, which is 1410 Glen Urquhart Avenue.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's unanimous. With council's indulgence, I'll recommend that we take a dinner break, and then we'll come back and we'll resume at 7.1.2.
I can't remember his name, he's a guy who plays soccer and he's that's right.
All right, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Councillor Frisch, for being ready. Again, we're going to go to 7.1.2 on the agenda. Again, we bounced forward a little bit to get rid of a couple of developmental processes to get them underway, but we're back to 7.1.2, Bill C-18 Online News Act and the city's use of paid advertising on social media platforms. And with that, it's been moved and seconded, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Garvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. O'Connell is going to introduce this report, and we have staff available for questions following that.
All right. Thanks, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you very much, Council. So as you'll see, we had received a letter from Black Press requesting that the city consider eliminating its sponsored advertising within social media platforms. This request came out of a change in the federal legislation that essentially required social media companies who were promoting and or sharing proprietary news information to compensate the media sources themselves. Essentially, the companies who were previously advertising, like the media ad companies, are no longer being promoted. So they are, some of them are asking for governments to change their approaches in protest, essentially, or in solidarity with the print media news field. Essentially, the letter itself, we undertook a bit more of an analysis as far as like what was our division of investment regarding print news media versus Facebook and or Meta. And you can see there's a bit of a breakdown within the briefing note there. So we are very much heavily investing through our statutory ads and other types of information promotions in print media. And really the amount of money that we're using to purchase promotion, like sponsored ads, is very marginal compared to what we're investing in print. The city of Courtenay, as you know, is currently undertaking a communication strategy, and part of the questions that we've been asking through the public engagement and the contributor engagement is regarding how folks want to receive and or provide information. And social media continues to be a growing way of getting information out in a very timely manner. It is also a way that different demographics or age groups prefer to consume their information about their community, as well as just generally, we're hoping in the event that council wants to consider taking action in response to the request from Black Press Media, is that we wait a little bit for the results coming out through the Your Courtenay Your Voice resident survey, as well as the communication strategy, as making the decision to eliminate promotion advertising through social media may be contrary to what the expectations of the public are. This doesn't mean that if in the event that we would not be purchasing sponsored ads, the city would still maintain its existing City of Courtenay Facebook page. And really the realization that now we don't have Black Press Media, such as the Comox Valley Record, promoting our media releases or things through their own pages, our City of Courtenay page has become that much more important, including the promotion of it. Anne Gio, our manager of communications, is also here. Should council have any questions regarding the types of sponsored ads we've been purchasing, but typically they have to do with substantial projects. They could have to do with hiring or recruitment, or pieces where we really want to ensure that the residents of Courtenay, especially those who may not already be following us on social media, are made aware of either an emerging issue or a change in service. Another example would be things like our solid waste program changes that are undergoing right now. So Anne's here to answer any questions as well, but for the time being, we're recommending you receive your report for information. And ideally, in the event you want to consider direction that moves us away paid social media sponsorship, we just give a little bit of time to hear the results from the communication strategy as well as from the resident survey. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ms. O'Connell, for that. And yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of big changes over the last month or so, and a lot of lead up to that as well. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. This seems to me like a classic double bind where, I mean, I have great sympathy for our news organizations and all those who are held in the thrall of these manipulative social media giants. But at the same time, it's a pretty essential communications tool. So what are you going to do? It strikes me that if we do go along with the recommendation here, which I'm inclined to support, that we're obliged to make some kind of a response through Black Press, and I wonder if there might be some consideration on the part of council to, since we're not actually going to do what they're asking us to do in solidarity, maybe we can do something else, like take out an ad, just expressing our perspective to the citizens of Courtenay and encouraging them to contact their social media organizations and make known their displeasure with the fact that local news and media are not being shared on those sites anymore. That would be something that would be constructive, and would at least show the local newspaper and others that we are concerned about this, but at the same time, we don't really want to cut off our nose to spite our face. So those are my thoughts on it. Thanks.
Thank Councillor Hillian, and next we have Councillor Warren.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, no, I appreciate those comments by Councillor Hillian because I feel similarly. When I was acting mayor, I was contacted by one of the Black Press publishers, and he wanted to give a heads up that this letter was coming, and we did have a chat about it. Excuse me. He did make a point of saying that there are at that time, which was mid-July, there were a couple of provinces who had pulled their advertising. So BC and Quebec, and I'm not sure if more have, and of course, corporations, etc. So I think, it was, he was hoping that we would follow suit. To just, our amount is fairly minimal compared to the province and other big companies, but I hope that we can maybe take a look at something that, like Councillor Hillian describes, to send the message, to send a message around this. But I understand the rationale for wanting to wait, so I'll let other people comment. But I did want to say that I did have that conversation. I did understand the frustration. It's pretty strange now when you just automatically go to a media site to check something and then you get that message. It's just blank now. And it really does have an impact. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Warren and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I guess I just wanted to point out that it's maybe still early days with this. When I read the legislation, it did look like media organizations could enter into agreements, obviously, with these online other online media companies, and maybe there would be a solution down the road anyways where they get back on there. I would assume it's in Meta's interest to have that information on there anyways, but I'm happy with the decision we're making as a city, and look forward to seeing how this all unfolds.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch, and Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of comment on Councillor Hillian's recommendation or possibility. One of the things to note is the report is really looking at the impact on Courtenay from a communication effectiveness standpoint. I did not do a detailed analysis on the politics behind the changes to the federal legislation and what had occurred either in the negotiation prior to the legislative changes and or coming out of it. So any political statement, of course, is at the purview of council, but it is not something that I feel I had any kind of expertise in based on the analysis. It really was just what would this mean to our communication channels from a dissemination perspective. So
thanks for that. And Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. And I want to agree with my colleagues. I'm feeling quite challenged by this because, the analysis from staff is quite clearly like this is a primary way that we are communicating with our community. And one of the issues that's coming up, I think, across the country right now with the wildfires is that after decades of individuals, communities receiving their news through their social media channels and no longer being able to access news and notifications around what's happening in their communities to protect their safety. I see that as a real challenge and frustrating. I understand why it's frustrating for news agencies but also for people who are accustomed to getting their information through social media, while simultaneously understanding that if we can pay for advertising and continue to use the channel to share important information, including emergency notifications, if and when that needs to happen, I'm in favor of continuing to use Meta and their channels as a way for us to communicate to our residents. But I agree with Councillor Hillian that I think there's a middle ground here for us to both show our support to our local media partners in the Comox Valley Record and Black Press, and also maybe even send a message to Meta around the impacts that this is having for our community. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm mindful of Ms. O'Connell's suggestion that further developments may come forward in relation to this, and perhaps it's worthwhile that we not take further action at this point, and we might be able to contemplate a motion at a future meeting where we actually write a letter to Meta ourselves and put that in the paper as an ad or something along those lines, and something that would take a little more time to craft than we would have here tonight. But I think if the situation continues, and unless, as Councillor Frisch suggested, it does get sorted out at the higher levels, I think at some point it would be worthwhile making a public comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. Appreciate those comments, and to Ms. O'Connell. A whole bunch of lights went on at the same time. Hang on one second. Councillor Moore.
Oh, I just wondered if we needed to put some kind of timeline on that, like in conjunction with the report, or maybe we're being telepathic here, but just so that it's not sort of open-ended. So and also I wondered about some kind of a response to the letter as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you very much. So we do have the results of the resident survey coming to the next council meeting. So that's very exciting, and we'll be able to see what the results were in regard to the questions we asked around how folks want to receive information and communicate with the city as well. So I think that will be very informative as to the public impact on the potential elimination of sponsored ads or things like that. I'm happy when we do bring that survey back to do some further recommendations at that point as part of that report. So that's at the next council meeting. So you wouldn't have to wait long. And if council would like, we can always advise Black Press Media that a recommendation will be made at the following meeting pending the outcome of the survey.
All right, yeah, no, sounds really good. And I think one of the parts of the conversation as well is just that difference between the impressions per paid advertising versus the free and that kind of stuff, just because sometimes we're getting lots of impressions through the free stuff, whether that's newspaper or not, but fully understand that we also have those statutory things that we're paying the newspapers for because of the rules that we have to follow. So I really appreciate the information. And with that, all those in favor of the motion? And that's unanimous. All right, we already did 7.2.1 and 7.2.2, so we're going to jump to 7.2.3, the Canadian Mortgage and CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund. Councillor Frisch.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to move that council endorse the Housing Accelerator Fund Action Plan that includes the proposed 7 initiatives generally outlined in the city's application under the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund program. And those are 1, Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and Incentive Program, 2, Land Acquisition and Disposition Assessment and Affordable Housing Partnership Strategy, 3, Development Application Streamlining, 4, Density Bonusing and Pre-zoning for Multi-residential and Key Growth Centers, 5, Missing Middle Plex Readiness, 6, Supportive Housing Policy and Bylaws, Community Amenity Contributions Policy, DCC Reduction Bylaw, and 7, Accessory Dwelling Unit Strategy. And that council authorize the chief administrative officer to enter into any contribution agreements or amending agreements that may be required should the city be approved for funding under the program.
All right, it's been moved and seconded, and I will pass it over to Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to council, we have a staff report here that gives an overview of the application that we made and looking for council support. And I think it's key. Ms. Wade's going to walk through it a bit. It is a very complicated program. Fortunately, the direction that we received on a lot of work program items through the implementation of the OCP, which straddled our previous council and this current council, has set us up very well to be in alignment with this. Timing was such that we had to develop that application and submit it effectively in draft pending endorsement from council. But I'll ask Ms. Wade to give us a very, an overview of that, and council may have some questions about the specific actions that are in and recommended relative to this. And then there will be some further engagement with the council as we flesh out these steps. Some of them are directly involving council, some of them are currently underway, et cetera. But I'll ask Ms. Wade to give you an overview.
Through the city manager to the mayor and council. This is really exciting, and to what the city manager was saying, this is a very complex grant. There's a lot of evaluation criteria and criteria that we had to use in putting together the grant application. So from a high level overview, the purpose of this grant from CMHC's perspective is that this is about accelerating housing supply and making transformative, long lasting changes on land use policies. And that would mean like a zoning bylaw, development cost charges, subdivision servicing bylaws, development procedures, those sorts of bylaws. So their goal is to make change over the next 3 years. This program operates over 3 years, and there's 4 times in that 3 years that we would receive funding. The metrics that they use is building permits. And how we had to look at this proposal is we had to actually look at what our base building permits are, and then be able to project how many building permits we could achieve with the tools of the 7 incentives that are within the report outlined. So that became very complicated. So staff, we did work with a consultant to help us, and we worked with our director of finance as well, we had to look at our land supply, sort of understand some of our zoning issues, just like the two previous reports you had tonight, that where can we find some ways to develop duplex, fourplex ready? How do we hit the missing middle? How do we change our land use policy? So those are all outlined in the 7 incentives, which, as city manager has also noted, is that we have aligned with council's strategic priorities, our financial plan for what we have within our budget currently. We will have to make some amendments should we be lucky to receive the funding, which after this report, the number that is in the application is $16.8 million over 3 years. So we would have to make some modifications to the budget once we know about that. But basically, a lot of the projects are already outlined, like DCC, subdivision, OCP implementation, zoning bylaw updates. So we're very well set up for this grant application. So with under each one of those incentives, there's like milestones where we have to identify what we're doing. Then we have to actually say how we meet their 4 evaluation criteria, which is supply, are the multi-units located near a transportation route in a compact community, or are they not? And then it also touches about affordability and dealing with the social economic inclusivity of our community profile, and also acknowledging what we know from our housing needs assessment. And then it also talks about how these buildings are supporting low carbon and carbon resilient communities. So very much talking to a lot of our OCP policies. So when you go through, we have to say how those incentives and our milestones are meeting those evaluation criteria. Then we outline the cost. So if we need consultants or whatever studies, and then each one has a metric, and we have to say this is going to generate X amount of additional housing units beyond our base, which would be just a trend analysis of how we've currently gone through issuing building permits. And then with these accelerators, what can we project? And we had to do that through a land inventory and analysis of our zoning. So very complex, and we go through the process, and it's in a portal. And then if we are successful, then they come back with an agreement with the housing action plans. The housing incentives, actually, some have been started. And so they're sort of like 1 year, some are 2 years, and they kind of straddle each other as they fit into our work plan. So I'm happy to answer any questions about it. The application was 26 pages. So it was a good task because it's setting us up for success to understand kind of what's going on with our zoning land and how we can target increasing supply.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much. And that's generated a question or comment from Councillor McCullough.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a great list, and I mean, if we can do these things in the short term, I think that's a lot of success that is already tied to many things that we've been discussing through the OCP process over the last 4 years. So all the better if there is funding available for us to initiate some of these policy changes, because they're big pieces of work. Something that jumped out at me that we haven't really discussed in any detail in the past, but that I'm quite interested in is the number 5 missing middleplex readiness, and the idea of pre-zoning rather than waiting for zoning applications that fit our OCP, doing that work preemptively to encourage that kind of zoning. And I think that's, to me, it's a logical strategy, and looks to see maybe people add units that wouldn't necessarily think of it, just because the rezoning application is pretty onerous for people that are not developers. My question is, we do have amenity contributions that are, in my mind, and I may have this wrong, tied to rezoning. Is that tied to rezoning, or is it tied to the development permitting process? Like, would we still be collecting those fees, whether it went through rezoning or if it just needed a development permit?
Through Council or Mayor Wells to Councillor McComb. That's a very good question. So the community amenity contributions are linked to that increase in density within a rezoning. And so if you pre-zone some areas, then that community amenity contribution would not be collected in those areas. There's City of Kelowna has done an awful lot of this, where they pre-zoned areas to do fourplexes in areas that they know a certain land use pattern, and they've actually say have 4 forms of development you can do, or styles. You go in and you pick it out and away you go and you build it. And it has been very efficient in the delivery of housing supply.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think there's a lot of logic to it, and any kind of policy change, there is going to be some trade-offs. So again, if we're receiving dollars from CMHC in order to leverage these things, then maybe foregoing some of these amenity contributions is a good trade-off.
And the other thing I like to just note on that is the money that we do receive is we can also use it towards community infrastructure, which includes pipes as well as green space as well. So, and it also, the money we receive can go into topping up our affordable housing reserve as well. So they do acknowledge that with some of the money that can go into helping, do some of the infrastructure that, say, the community amenity contributions would contribute.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And then any developments that, if you're taking down a single family home and putting in a fourplex, is there 3 additional DCCs in a scenario like that, or how does that tie in?
With the DCCs, it would depend where the areas and what the DCCs are. And yes, it's for additional growth, but it wouldn't count for if something is existing. You couldn't collect the DCCs for that.
Okay, yeah, thanks for answering those questions.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. And next we have, Mr. Garber, did you want to make a comment as well?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just along the lines, it will be very interesting to hear at UBCM, hopefully, potentially where the province is going on the regulatory side of land use. So it's a very exciting time, but we actually have quite a few unknowns right at this point. So we have a federal program that's launched that we're very, very well positioned to do. What the implications if we're no longer in rezonings, because a lot of these things are really unit dependent. So I really appreciate the ability to sort of lay this out, and at the same time, in a couple of weeks we'll hopefully hear maybe where the province is going in order to, kind of really fully vet this out. I could let you know that, and I know staff are hearing this as well, the development community is really eagerly anticipating what's going to happen. There's a lot of speculation out there, and they're lining up to try and take advantage of these incentives that are coming. So that could be really positive in our community. And we're already a pretty high performer on the units that we're developing. So I know there's other questions, but I just wanted to just highlight that hopefully UBCM will also give us a lot of good news.
Thanks, Mr. Garbutt. And Councillor Schulker.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks to staff for in the middle of summer holidays getting this application in, and I also understand it to be a competitive one. So happy to see that we've set ourselves up hopefully for success with our OCP and our strategic priorities. Really happy to see these 7 program criteria that we're going to be working on. I guess my first question in relation to these 7 areas that will be in your shop is, I think at the moment this is being planned on the work plan, this work, and the funding that would come in as it relates to onboarding new units into the community. You mentioned it can be spent on infrastructure, community infrastructure, and be reinvested in our affordable housing fund, but can it also be used to pay for the moving this work forward? So whether it be consulting fees or contracted fees.
Through Mayor Wells to Councillor Joker, yes, it can be. It can help with resources for us. So consultants, or we can also look at if there was some staff that we wanted to hire, we could do that as well. So they do support us from a resource.
Great, thanks. And my last question really is around the total. And so I think you mentioned 16.8 million. In the staff report, it says 12 to 15. So it's 16.8 is the accurate number. And just in the staff report, and you kind of spoke to like there's a larger formula that was utilized. But I guess part of that is also the identification of the potential amount of units that we could onboard when you've taken in all the factors. And that's not in the staff report. Is that a number that you have to get to the 16.8 million? How many units are we looking at potentially onboarding in the community?
Through Mayor Wells to Councillor Joker, I'm happy to provide a little summary of that because every incentive has units that we're providing, and so different types of units within those 7. And I can give you a number like what it actually is, but we have to hit a growth rate with CMHC, and the growth rate is up to 10% increase over our base of units. And I wish I could pull the number out of my head right now, but I can't.
Okay.
But I want to say I don't want to say. I'd rather send you a briefing note.
That's great. And it's a goal for us to imagine in our heads, right? And also to our partners in the community who will be building our housing, right? It's a nice goal to have. If we have that number, I think would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, sure.
Thanks, Councillor Schulker and Ms. Wade for the presentation. I think that's answered most of them. I feel, well, we spoke at length today about it already, so I feel like I'm fairly educated on kind of where things are going, and again, just huge thanks to staff for realizing this opportunity and making the efforts to make sure that we can. I mean, it's a lot of money that if we're able to get even a portion of that coming in our direction, how that'll have an effect on our community. So just really want to say thanks. We have a motion on the table, so all those in favor? And that's unanimous. Perfect. And we can move on to 7.3.1, council expense reimbursement policy revision. Been moved and seconded. Mr. Legemar, did you want to speak to this at all, or do you just want to wait if there's any questions? Over to you, sir.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Nice to be here. I will be speaking to this one tonight. So we have an exciting revision number 8 of our council expense reimbursement policy. There are no humongous changes, but it's 7 small changes that will really make the expense claiming process much more streamlined, cleaning out some of those pieces that have been there over the past 7 years because it hasn't been updated, and really align our policy with what we are actually doing in practice. It's best to have, what we say we're doing is what we're actually doing. And by updating the policy, we'll be aligning that very nicely. In the past, we had an expense policy that covered staff and council. We're taking that apart. This is council's policy. This is just for council. Staff gets to be dealt with Jeff in the way he sees fit, the way he sees fit. Looking at one of the pieces that pops out is the change to this compensation per diem. There was this $200 a day piece in the old policy that said you can claim $200 per day up to $1,000 a year for the cost of being away for city business. And this wasn't accessed consistently across all councillors. And it was also a challenge to track because every time a councillor made a claim, somebody would have to track how many have they done this year. And then we'd have to do the source deductions on that. And bringing the remuneration for council should be covered in one place, the remuneration policy. And that's what we're doing. If council sees that the remuneration isn't adequate for the amount of time, we can revisit that by revisiting the remuneration policy if council wishes. Another piece we pulled out was In the event that you're traveling in your personal vehicle and you crashed, the city would cover your deductible. That was something that I really wasn't comfortable with. It's your vehicle, it's your responsibility, it's your business if you crash to have your deductible where it should be. That's one thing I didn't agree with. And then bringing it to the more impactful everyday thing is really aligning how meals are reimbursed. We've gone and updated the old per meal rates. Often when I see an expense claim, I see the meal portion of that expense was done in a reverse method. You claimed the day and then you had to minus off the meals that were covered at the conference. This way, we're only going to ask, did you have to pay for a meal? If yes, which one? And then you'll claim for what you paid for. I brought the meal allowance up. It is above the feds right now, but I went out for lunch the other day and I was like, this is what it is. If council is unhappy with the amount, it could be changed, but I set it to what was reasonable. You know, if you want to go out for a fancy steak dinner in Vancouver, the $45 won't cover it. However, is it the city's responsibility to pay for your steak dinner? Maybe not, but it's the city's responsibility to provide you some sort of reimbursement to feed you when we're asking you to be away. Another final piece is the prepayment. I've eliminated the prepayment for travel. I have not, though, eliminated, like, if you book travel and you have a receipt for, say, an airline ticket, you can make that claim as soon as it's there. What we had in the past was you could request prepayment for the meal allowances and your daily allowances, which made it a real challenge because when council returned and they say they had some meals provided, but they had already been paid for that prepayment, it just made a lot of back and forth of not a whole lot of money, and it wasn't a good use of time. So all in all, this is really revised to streamline that expense process and make it nice and clear what council is being reimbursed for. And that's all I have today.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for going through the time to kind of tease out some of these things. As somebody who fell on all sides of these things. The $200 per day one was always funny because I'd be told I was eligible, and then, oh no, you own a company, so you're not. And then I sold the company, and like, well, now you're unemployed, so you're not eligible. But then somebody would say you are eligible, and it just provided some confusion, I would say. So really appreciate some of that clarity, and especially the meal portion of it, because that's what I would provide. These are the meals that I had to pay for with the receipts, and or without a receipt, but just to say these were the meals. But then there was a form, so I don't know, will that form also be updated, or will we get a separate form?
We will update the form.
Excellent, because that form hurt my brain a little bit. That being said, Councillor McCullum.
It's funny, I was wondering if we were going to get a different form as well. The other question I had is just around booking travel. I'm just glancing at it. It didn't occur to me when I read the report earlier, but if there is direction on, even the recent example of booking travel to UBCM, and now that there's multiple options for getting off the island with via a passenger ferry or BC ferries or flights, do we have policy that speaks to that?
We do not. That's really between you and your CAO and the executive assistant to do that.
Okay.
Mr. Garbett just has a comment as well.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the question. We've modernized a great. There's no water to. I can't break the ice with spilled water. We're continuing to try and make some internal efficiencies as you go through. Ultimately, you're accountable to the taxpayers and how you want to approach paying for your travel. Our expectation generally be the least cost option, and we do recognize that it's becoming more and more expensive to travel, and even though the options are getting a little wider. So I think We do need, I think, to do a little bit more refinement around this because also what about canceled trips, and there's costs related to that. So we're stay tuned on that as we work with our financial staff, and we have an excellent legislative services staff that has some experience. So we're picking away at this. But you know, I appreciate your feedback because you're the ones that are using this. With, as Mr. Langemeyer had said, my expectation of our staff is that it is the least cost, most efficient method to go. And I've not seen anything that suggested we needed to clarify that to council at this point. But this is good to have dialogue around that. It's not a significant expense in our lines now, particularly coming out of COVID, but the options are almost limitless now on how to participate. And council, I think, is going to have a lot of options in front of them.
Thanks, Mr. Garbutt. Any other follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I think, yeah, our current council has been very responsible in terms of looking for those most affordable options. My experience has been that there's always carpooling that takes place in order to get to conferences and minimize ferry costs. But in a different situation, we could end up with one council member that books flights over while everybody else has always taken the ferry. And it just occurred to me that we don't really have any direction on that. And through another board that I sit in, it's very well laid out, like when a flight can be booked, it has to be over a certain number of car hours of travel. Like it's very spelled out. So it might, I don't think it's of any urgency given who I serve with at this time, but it may be something that we should put our minds to going forward before, you know, addressing it as a after the fact issue. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, you know, and I think the report spoke to like there can be extenuating circumstances and stuff because sometimes you have multiple events. And so just to get from point A to point B and back again can be a bit challenging from time to time. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I agree with your last point because sometimes now that gas prices are higher, depending on where you're going, those costs with ferry and driving can add up compared to a flight. And then some folks also still have jobs and other, you know, part-time jobs, full-time jobs, and sometimes the quicker option is more helpful for schedules. But in any event, so this policy still allows for the executive assistant to help with booking flights on the corporate card, because I quite enjoy having that little perk. Appreciation to our executive assistant for that. And in terms of the budget allocation, I mean, it sounds like we were actually supposed to be coming to have approval for the conferences, which I thought that the practice was that we, those 3 conferences were automatically approved. I guess I'm wondering about the variable amount, because some people do go to Columbia and the LGLA conferences that happen that are often quite useful. So I just, would those 2 as examples be included in the variable amount, and how do we know how much the allocation is for that?
So this is one of the areas where what we were doing did not align with the policy. So in the old policy, it said every council travel had to be approved by council.
Right.
We didn't do that in practice today. We had those 3 main ones, and that was what everybody went to. This policy permits for those 3 main conferences as a boilerplate, and then the additional travel should be approved by council. And so that would be a council member bring it forward and say, hey, this is something I'd like to go to. Is council down with that? There's council approval of that.
We're up. Go, Mr.
Garbutt. Thank you. And I really appreciate the question because I also inherited some of those questions, and we've had a lot of changes around the administrative support side and legislative services and the CAO's office. So I would suggest that just like when we get started and set a schedule, counselors should consider their annual professional development and very early as we're going through that, where we'll work to maybe have a pre-standing item on the agenda to say what conferences do people want to attend, and then we can just do it. So typically we wouldn't have to kind of wait on a basis, because a lot of these things have registration deadlines, and we've seen that happen recently. So that's what we offer, I think, in terms of a way to make it more streamlined. I've talked to Jessica, or sorry, Ms. O'Kane, our executive assistant, about that, and we can work with legislative services staff to just have a date on the calendar, council calendar, that we would have that as an item, and council can consider that. And then at the same time, if something does come up, well, I guess it would reflect the UBCM housing conference that came up in 2020, early in the year. You know, nobody knew about that, so that happened. So just trying to have a little bit of structure around that.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, you know, something that might be worthwhile contemplating as well, and not just the convenience that Councilor Moran spoke to, but also when you know you have a conference coming up. Often the earlier you book for your ticket, the lower the cost is. And I know with FCM this year, I lucked out because the price was going up, but then I had to go up north, and it was actually cheaper to fly from Prince Rupert to Toronto. But that's another thing of, you know, where that it's not just convenient, but it can actually be a significant cost saver if we're booking those flights as soon as possible when we know we're going to be flying out. And then something that I know had to be contemplated in the past, and that's when you're potentially wearing more than one hat. If you're chair of a committee or have a role within the regional district, as a past chair of the regional district and mayor, there was this communication that was done between the two organizations to make sure that it was a sort of a fair amount of who's covering which costs and stuff like that, which is kind of hard because here it's like you're a single employee, but it's like, well, things can get complicated, especially with the regional district. So yeah, but other than that, really liked where things are at, and I think we had a good discussion. Any further comments before I call the question? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And then we'll go to the appointment of the approving officer. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that council rescind the appointment of Rick Fuchs as approving officer and appoint Marianne Wade as the approving officer.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. And Mr. Garvin.
Thank you, through council. This is a relatively straightforward report. We've had a change in staffing. Council may or may not be aware or recall, I am the deputy approving officer. And so we have a structure in place that makes sense. And we have an extremely qualified director. It gives us some flexibility to build some capacity as well. And so our recommendation is to appoint Ms. Marianne Wade as the approving officer.
All right. I think you've answered all the questions. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And congratulations. Next, we have council reports. Start with Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just quickly highlight the August 17th Habitat for Humanity Key Ceremony celebration of their new Piercy build, which was pretty amazing to watch. And I'll note that they're the only organization that focuses on an ownership model and a hand up for hardworking families. So that's really great. And also the August 26th Comox Valley First Pride Parade was unbelievably well attended by the community. It was very supportive, and it was a lot of fun. So good job, Comox Valley, on that.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. Councillor Hillian.
I'll pass, thank you.
Councillor Joker.
Thanks, Mayor. Just two really quick updates, or two things that I got to attend last week. One was the working group meeting of the new Comox Valley Substance Use Collaborative. One of the last working groups before the collaborative leadership will be coming to council and to the other regional partners to deliver the phase 2 report of the strategy, the Comox Valley Substance Use Strategy. So looking forward to that. And myself and some of our staff and the mayor and Councillor Moran and Councilor McCollum got to attend the Pride flag raising ceremony at City Hall on Friday. I wasn't able to attend the festivities over the weekend, but I was able to be there to celebrate the raising of the flag, and just wanted to give my congratulations to the organizers for moving that forward and working with the city, and for city staff for working so well with the organizers for the weekend of festivities. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Zolker and Councillor McCollum. And Councillor Moore.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll just reiterate, as the Pride weekend was phenomenal, really successful. I heard only positivity about it, really well attended. I just wanted to mention also that I attended a few of the Sims concert series on Sundays this summer, not all of them, but some of them. And I was there for the last one. And I just wanted to give kudos to staff for that series. I've just heard nothing but positive from not just people who attended the nights that I attended, but even just making a point of saying to me, you know, I went to one of the concerts during the summer. It was phenomenal. And, you know, I know a lot of people from Cumberland and Comox came out as well. And just really appreciate that concert series. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. I'll just start just by saying thanks to all of council, especially the acting mayors who attended quite a few things over June, July, and August for me. Over the last little bit, as has been mentioned, the Habitat Key ceremony was certainly a major event. The Pride flag raising, the parade, as well as the Pride in the Park were, again, for those events being done for the first time. The feedback that I heard from everybody who attended was that it was absolutely amazing, and really looking to see how that'll increase over the years. I did spend some time with Ronna Ray Leonard when she offered me a cupcake, or I guess everybody. Also attended a pickleball open house that was, again, extremely well attended. The food bank also had a open house, and it was great to get a tour of their new location. They've been there for a year now, but to really get a sense of the programs that they're running. One of the main ones actually was how there are people that donate things specifically for birthdays, and so they have an actual program for birthdays. Takra BC had their championships here. So for those who have not seen Takra, basically volleyball without your hands. So a lot of wheelhouse kicks and backflips and stuff, which was very exciting, although I felt a lot of pain just watching it. There was the Yana bike ride, again, their annual event where I believe over $90,000 was raised. So big kudos to them. Hospice had their fundraiser. Their goal was about $275,000, and at last count, they're at about 325. So really good community support for these organizations. Ribfest was another big event that happened in Cumberland, but really felt throughout our whole community. We can't blame all the smoke on Ribfest, but certainly those that are going to have meat sweats for the next little while. Over the summer, the downtown Courtney's had their summer market, and so I attended that today and had great chats with them about the future of the space where it occupies in front of the art gallery and what its future holds in our community. Again, going back to the playbook. And just drawing attention to the fact that next Wednesday will be the last summer market. So if you want to get out there and enjoy. And finally, I just really want to say how proud I was about the Stan Hagen park dedication that happened, and the fact that we were able to, the staff were working with his family and in our community to honor the person who held 10 ministerial portfolios and did a whole lot of work in our community. For instance, the first chair of the community foundation, et cetera, and just really a lot of work that he had done. And it was great to be part of that recognition. And with that, we'll move on to our bylaws. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I move that council give first, second, and third reading to temporary borrowing bylaw number 3104, 2023.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And 9.2.1, Councillor McCollum.
I'll move that council adopt zoning amendment bylaw number 3095 to amend zoning amendment, the zoning bylaw number 2500, 2007, part 24, industrial 2 zone, section 8.24.1, permitted uses to add daycare use to unit A of strata lot 5, district lot 236, Comox district, strata plan VIS 5235, which is 4655A Madrona Place.
Second.
Thanks very much for reading that all out, Councillor McCollum. It's much appreciated. Any questions or comments? Just really bringing more affordable, well, I can't say affordable, but more daycare. And with the province's plan, now hopefully that's very affordable. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passed unanimously, and we are adjourned.